Medieval kings were rarely tied to one place. Instead, they moved constantly across their realm, dragging courtiers, servants, cooks, and guards with them. This endless royal progress kept nobles loyal, allowed direct inspection of lands, and prevented rebellions from brewing. Yet for villagers, the king's arrival meant more dread than excitement, as food, lodging, and supplies were taken by right. One royal visit could empty barns and granaries overnight, leaving peasants praying the crown would pass them by quickly. Kings prized clean linen shirts as a symbol of purity and power. Their laundries functioned like bustling military units, washing dozens of garments each day. Water, ashes, soapwood, and herbs filled giant tubs as servants scrubbed, boiled, and beat fabrics to maintain royal hygiene. In an age where most peasants bathed only a few times a year, a king slipping into fresh linen daily was a powerful display of wealth. Many kings maintained private menageries filled with exotic animals gifted by foreign rulers or captured in trade. Lions, leopards, bears, and even strange birds strutted through palace courtyards, living symbols of a monarch's reach. To medieval eyes, these creatures were more than spectacles. They were proof the king's reputation stretched beyond his borders. Astrology held enormous influence over royal decisions. Before launching campaigns or sealing alliances, some kings consulted star readers and horoscopes. War plans shifted with planetary movements, and marriages waited on favourable constellations. To medieval rulers, fate wasn't written on parchment, it shimmered across the heavens. A king's seal carried the power of his command. Wax and metal authenticated laws, treaties, and executions. Guards protected it with absolute vigilance, and forging it was a crime punishable by death. The seal was not merely a tool of state, it was the voice of the crown. Even crowned heads slept under canvas. When castles were distant or roads unsafe, kings camped in luxurious field tents embroidered with symbols of power. These royal encampments resembled mobile courts, complete with kitchens, chaplains, guards, and banners fluttering in the wind. A kingdom in motion. Some kings employed jesters not simply for laughter, but for honesty. Cloaked in absurdity, the fool held a dangerous role, delivering truths that courtiers feared to speak. Mockery served as a mirror, reminding rulers of their flaws and grounding pride before it became tyranny. A king never slept unprotected. Elite guards known as bedchamber knights kept watch through the night, stationed at doors or resting lightly beside them. Their loyalty was absolute, sworn to awaken steel in hand at the slightest disturbance. Peaceful sleep was a privilege earned through vigilance. Smell mattered in the medieval court. Kings bathed in rosewater, wore garments scented with crushed herbs, and carried pomanders filled with spices and ambergris. Sweet fragrances were symbols of divinity, cleanliness, and superiority. In a world thick with grime and sweat, a perfumed king was unmistakable and unforgettable. Personal grooming was not merely fashion but symbolism. Some rulers enforced strict rules on beards and hair among their nobles, ensuring no subject appeared more regal than the king. From beard length to the curl of a moustache, royal decree shaped aristocratic style, proof that power extended even to the face. The year is 1348. The air hangs heavy with decay and dread. Across Europe, the Black Death spreads like wildfire, cutting through towns and villages with the same quiet finality as a scythe through wheat. Entire families vanish in a week. Streets once filled with the sounds of merchants and laughter now echo only with the cries of the dying and the toll of the church bell. Amid this nightmare, a lone figure walks the cobblestones, cloaked in black, masked like a great bird of ill omen. He is the plague doctor, the man who dares to face the invisible enemy. Each morning begins before the sun, in a dimly lit room filled with the scent of vinegar and burnt herbs. The doctor rises in silence. His preparations are both ritual and defence. Layer by layer he covers himself in his armour against death. First the heavy linen undershirt, soaked in oils thought to ward off miasma. Then the waxed leather cloak, thick and stiff, sealing his body from the poisoned air. He ties gloves tight around his wrists, tucks his trousers into high boots, and anoints the seams with animal fat or camphor. Every motion is deliberate, born from fear and necessity. On the table before him rests the instrument of his identity, the mask, long-beaked, glass-eyed, and lined inside with a mixture of herbs, flowers, and vinegar-soaked sponges. Lavender, mint, roses, cloves, each chosen not only for its scent, but for its symbolic power against corruption. He places it over his face, fastening the straps, and breathes through the narrow beak. The world outside now comes through a thin, filtered hiss. The mask is his protection, and his prison. With a wide-brimmed hat atop his head and a staff in his hand, he steps out into the grey morning. The streets of the city are silent, but alive with suffering. Doors marked with red crosses tell the story of homes struck by plague. Windows are shuttered. Animals lie dead in the gutters. A death cart creaks past, driven by men with faces wrapped in cloth, calling out for the dead. The doctor walks carefully, avoiding puddles that might carry disease, his staff tapping against the stones like the ticking of a clock. He moves through the fog, part man, part myth, a solitary figure between the living and the dead. His first stop is a narrow house where the smell of sickness leaks into the street. Inside, the air is thick and hot. A family lies huddled on straw mattresses, pale and trembling. The father's skin is mottled, his neck swollen with dark lumps the size of eggs. The doctor kneels beside him, inspecting the buboes that mark the disease. With a gloved hand, he touches the fevered skin, then dips a knife into vinegar and lances the swelling. The fluid that spills out is black and foul. He applies a poultice of onions and herbs, a desperate measure born from the wisdom of ancient texts. The patient groans. The doctor knows it will not save him, but he does it anyway. He must. It is his duty, his burden, his attempt to impose order upon chaos. Outside, he records the man's name in a ledger. Each page fills with ink and sorrow. Some names have no one left to speak them. As he moves from house to house, his staff points, prods, and protects. He does not touch the people unless he must. Even the desperate keep their distance. To see the beaked mask approaching is both relief and terror. He is hope and death made flesh. By midday, the doctor returns to his quarters. His gloves and cloak reek of smoke and sickness. On his work table, jars and mortars lie scattered among bundles of herbs and scraps of parchment. Here he becomes part alchemist, part scholar. He mixes remedies drawn from the wisdom of Galen and Avicenna, grinding dried roots into powders, boiling wine with myrrh, and preparing theriac, a syrup of honey and exotic spices once thought to cure all poison. He burns juniper and sulphur in the corners of the room, letting the smoke curl through the rafters in the hope it will cleanse the air of invisible death. His tools glint in the candlelight, knives, needles, leeches in glass jars. He writes his findings in Latin, noting how the disease spreads along the trade roads, how rats and filth seem always to precede the sickness. His mind teeters between reason and despair. He feels he is touching the edge of understanding, and yet the plague continues, mocking his efforts. Beyond the city walls, pits are dug so wide and deep they seem to swallow the earth itself. The death carts unload their cargo beneath a veil of smoke. The doctor stands at the edge, inspecting corpses, searching for patterns in their suffering. He writes of bile, of imbalance, of humours gone foul. He does not yet know the truth, that the plague rides in the bodies of fleas and rats. But his observations, his careful notes will one day guide those who come after him. In medieval towns, the easiest way to know a tavern had fresh ale wasn't by a menu or sign, but by a long wooden pole called an ale stake. Tavern owners hung a leafy branch or garland from the pole, announcing to the whole street that a new batch was ready. Inside the tavern, drinking was a shared ritual. Large communal jugs sat at the centre of each table, and everyone drank from the same vessel. It wasn't just about the ale, it was about building camaraderie, trust, and sometimes questionable hygiene. Drinking horns added a ceremonial flair to tavern nights. These curved horns were passed around, each person offering a toast. Dropping the horn was not only humiliating, it was believed to curse the evening with bad luck. Instead of cards or dice, some taverns tested strength. Patrons challenged each other to arm wrestling matches, stone-lifting contests, or who could hold a heavy tankard at arm's length the longest. These competitions weren't just for bragging rights, sometimes the winner earned free ale. Not all tavern entertainment involved music. Many nights a skilled storyteller or local gossip became the star of the room. Tales of haunted woods, battlefield legends, and spicy scandals circulated from table to table, making taverns the medieval equivalent of social media. Tavern keepers who watered down their ale faced strict fines and public humiliation. Selling weak or adulterated beer was considered a betrayal of the community and could ruin a tavern's reputation overnight. When beds ran out, travellers unrolled cloaks and slept on tavern floors beside the hearth. The warmth was welcome, though the occasional late-night scuffle or stumbling drunk could make for a restless night. Taverns were hotspots for trouble. Town watchmen patrolled them nightly, breaking up fights, enforcing curfews, and hauling home anyone too drunk to stand. Drinking competitions were common, and losers often had to be carried home by companions. Some contests became legendary, celebrated, or mocked for years afterward. Some wealthy taverns imported unusual drinks from faraway lands, including spiced wines from France or strong beers from the Low Countries. These exotic flavours were expensive, rare, and a symbol of high status for anyone wealthy enough to order them. Medieval burial grounds were rarely peaceful resting places for long. Space was limited, so graves were often reused after a few years. The bones of earlier burials were carefully dug up and stacked in ossuaries, stone crypts where skulls and bones were arranged in neat rows. This wasn't disrespectful, but a way to make room while still keeping the remains ready for Judgment Day. Death was wrapped in superstition. If a body looked too fresh, villagers feared the dead might rise as a vampire or revenant. Corpses could be staked, weighed down with stones, or even decapitated to ensure they stayed put. Fear of being buried alive wasn't just a later era worry. Some coffins had small holes, or even a bell and string mechanism that allowed anyone who woke up underground to call for rescue. A chilling but oddly comforting precaution. Placing coins in the mouth or over the eyes of the deceased was common, believed to pay their passage into the next world. This ancient tradition carried into medieval Europe as a way to ensure safe travel for the soul. Funerals could be loud and dramatic. Wealthy families sometimes hired mourners whose job was to cry, wail, and lament the dead, creating a spectacle that marked the gravity of the moment. Some warriors and mercenaries took a more macabre approach to death, turning enemy skulls into drinking cups, a grim display of triumph and defiance. Bodies were sometimes buried with shoes so the dead could walk into the afterlife, ensuring they would not wander lost. Churches displayed the bones of saints to attract pilgrims. These relics were believed to offer blessings and even miracles, turning death into a source of spiritual power. Loyal dogs were occasionally buried alongside their owners, seen as faithful companions in both life and death. When someone died, bells were rung not just to announce the death, but to drive away evil spirits and protect the soul on its journey. Before pottage and porridge, peasants often made portable cakes from mashed beans and barley flour. Vendors fried or baked these thick patties over coals, serving them with a drizzle of vinegar or garlic oil. Packed with protein and easy to carry, these travel cakes were an early version of the veggie patty. They could last for days without spoiling, perfect for workers, travellers, and soldiers on the move. Fried foods were medieval favourites. Onion and leek fritters were quick, cheap, and delicious, made from ground barley or rye flour and fried crisp in animal fat. They were a noisy, fragrant street snack, eaten hot with a pinch of salt or vinegar, making them one of the earliest forms of fried fast food. While nobles dined on fine cuts, peasants took what was left: heart, liver, or lung. Vendors grilled these offal skewers over open flames, the smoky scent drawing hungry workers from every corner. This cheap, high-protein food became a street staple in cities like London and Bruges, proving that nothing went to waste. These small, sweet treats were made from crushed nuts, oats and honey, pressed into chewy cakes. Vendors sold them at markets and festivals to travellers and children. They were considered a luxury among peasants, an early energy bar that blended sweetness and sustenance in a bite-sized snack. Eels were everywhere, from rivers to royal kitchens. Street vendors baked eel-filled pastries seasoned with herbs and onions, selling them hot to passers-by. They were rich, oily, and surprisingly affordable. Eel pies were so popular that some English towns became famous for them, especially along the Thames. For those who couldn't afford meat, this vegetable stew was served in hollowed loaves of bread. The bread soaked up the hot broth, turning into an edible bowl. It was warm, filling, and could be eaten entirely. A clever no-waste meal for workers and travellers alike. A winter classic, roasted chestnuts were sold straight from the pan. Their warm, nutty scent filled city squares and market alleys. Cheap, comforting, and portable, they were one of the few snacks enjoyed by rich and poor alike. A timeless street food that still exists today. Salted fish was a medieval staple, and small hand pies filled with minced herring or cod were a popular tavern and street snack. Mixed with mustard, onions, or herbs, these portable pies were perfect for dock workers and travellers on the road. A thrifty creation, leftover stew cooled and solidified, then cut into blocks and skewered. Vendors reheated them over coals, turning yesterday's meal into a chewy, savoury street snack. It was an odd but practical way to stretch food supplies and minimise waste. A favourite among tavern goers, these were made by soaking old bread in ale, mixing it with fruit, spices and eggs, then frying it into golden balls. Sweet, boozy and hearty, they were often sold late at night to people leaving taverns. The medieval version of a street-side night snack. When we imagine castles, we often picture bare grey stone walls. But many medieval lords transformed those interiors with vibrant colours. Walls were painted with rich reds, blues and golds, often decorated with geometric patterns, religious imagery, or family heraldry. A cold stone hall could suddenly feel like a dazzling palace. Defensive design wasn't only about thick walls. Narrow arrow slits, also known as loops, gave archers a wide field of fire outward, while attackers outside struggled to find even the smallest angle to shoot back inside. It was a simple but devastating advantage for defenders. The beating heart of the castle was the Great Hall. This space wasn't just for feasts and celebrations. It was also a courtroom, a council chamber, and a meeting place for the community. It was where politics, justice and daily life all came together under one high roof. Though castles could be freezing in winter, some included a clever comfort. Heated stone benches built into the walls. Flues beneath carried warm air from the kitchens or fires, turning cold stone into a surprising medieval luxury. The moat wasn't only for defence. Servants sometimes used it to wash clothes, scrubbing garments in the same waters that were meant to keep attackers away. While practical, it probably didn't make the moat any cleaner. Communication in large castles relied on sound. Guards in towers carried great horns, which they used not just to warn of invasion, but also to announce meal times, shift changes, and gate closings. The echo of a horn shaped the rhythm of castle life. Every castle brewed its own beer, an essential part of daily survival. Water was often unsafe to drink, so beer, low in alcohol but full of calories, was consumed by everyone from the lord to the lowliest servant. Before glass was common, castle windows were covered with sheets of polished animal horn. These translucent panels let in light while blocking wind and rain, a practical solution centuries before glass became affordable. Castles needed to preserve food long term, especially during sieges. Some built underground ice pits lined with straw, where meat and fish could be stored for months, a medieval version of refrigeration. Finally, not every moat was just a muddy trench. Some were stocked with carp and eels, providing fresh food for the castle's inhabitants. In this way, the moat worked as both defence and dinner. In the medieval world, queens often wielded far more authority than people realise. When kings marched to war, which was often, queens stepped in to run entire estates. They oversaw harvests, settled legal disputes, and approved tax collections. In many regions, a queen's word carried the same authority as the king's seal, making her the true power behind the throne. In times of conflict, royal marriage was never just romance, it was chess. Queens arranged marriages not only for their children, but for nieces, cousins, and allied families across Europe. Each pairing forged bonds, sealed treaties, or combated rival powers. These political unions could alter borders, end wars, or ignite them anew, all orchestrated quietly from a Queen's Council chamber. Maintaining the royal lineage was taken seriously, and queens travelled with their own physicians, herbalists and midwives, to ensure they remained healthy enough to produce heirs. These personal medical teams often knew remedies and practices unavailable to common people, forming an early version of elite healthcare. Some queens commanded their own chapels within castles, complete with chosen confessors and hand-selected clergy. This gave them personal access to spiritual authority and sometimes political leverage. Their chapels served as quiet sanctuaries for prayer, planning, and diplomacy, away from courtly ears. Medieval queens frequently embroidered tapestries and garments, and some of these works contained hidden prayers, symbolic warnings, or coded messages stitched into borders and patterns. In an era when women were often excluded from official politics, a needle and thread offered subtle ways to express influence. Queens were also champions of literacy. Many funded the creation of illuminated manuscripts, hired scribes, and built libraries inside palaces. Their patronage helped preserve religious texts, poetry, and early scientific works, making them silent saviours of medieval knowledge. When noble families clashed, and they often did, queens stepped in as mediators. Their prestige allowed them to smooth over feuds, negotiate territorial disputes, and prevent bloodshed. Peace, in many cases, wore a crown. Royal dowries were immense. Some queens arrived with entire towns, fertile farmlands, or even fortresses as part of their marriage agreements. The lands they brought could significantly expand a kingdom's resources overnight. Many queens championed religious charity, founding hospitals, almshouses, and poorhouses. Their patronage saved countless lives and created early forms of organised social care in Europe. Queens were not confined to chambers. Some were skilled hawkers and hunters who rode beside knights during royal hunts. These excursions allowed them to mingle with warriors, hear court gossip, and exert influence far from the formal throne room. The medieval world also thrived on odd, brutal, and often bizarre forms of amusement. From games of chance and laughter to spectacles of violence and fire, medieval festivals and leisure reveal a side of history at once fascinating and unsettling. Laughter often echoed from games like Blind Man's Bluff. This pastime required one person to be blindfolded and attempt to tag the others, stumbling through furniture and revellers. Unlike the refined dances or poetry contests, this was a game of physical comedy, where nobles of all ages joined in. It was considered a test of agility and wit. The The blindfolded players' clumsy attempts became a source of merriment for the gathered court, and it often broke the formality of feasts, bringing even lords and ladies down to the same level of play. Across towns and villages, people gathered for animal baiting, a violent spectacle where chained bears, bulls, or packs of dogs were set upon for public amusement. Entire arenas were constructed for this purpose, and betting was common. The brutality was not hidden, it was celebrated. For medieval crowds, violence was not taboo but thrilling, a raw expression of power and survival. These events reinforced the medieval fascination with dominance over nature, and, disturbingly, the suffering of animals was part of the attraction. In certain European regions, dancing on stilts became a favourite pastime, particularly during festivals. Participants strapped long wooden stilts to their legs and tried to dance to music, keeping balance as villagers cheered them on. Among the strangest medieval amusements was the brutal practice of goose pulling. A live goose, its neck greased, was hung upside down from a rope stretched across a road. Mounted riders would charge beneath, attempting to tear its head off in one swift motion. What shocks us today was, in its time, a festive contest tied to holidays or weddings. The difficulty of pulling the greased bird made it a challenging game, but the cruelty was part of the thrill. By the Renaissance, goose pulling had spread widely through Europe, even making its way to the Americas. Medieval entertainers were skilled in the dramatic, and fire-breathing was among the most spectacular tricks. Using alcohol or rags soaked in pitch, performers would spit great bursts of flame into the air. For villagers who lived without fireworks or pyrotechnics, such displays seemed almost magical. These performers often travelled in troops, combining juggling, storytelling, and daring fire acts. Fire not only amazed the crowd, but also symbolised danger controlled, an impressive feat in a world where open flame was both essential and feared. Not every medieval fight was fought with swords. During harvest festivals, villagers sometimes staged mock battles using vegetables as weapons. Armies of peasants, armed with cabbages, turnips and apples, would hurl their produce at one another in chaotic melees. Ale was central to medieval life, and drinking contests were a common feature of taverns and festivals. Participants tested their capacity for alcohol, with crowds egging them on. The loser, however, often faced public humiliation, sometimes being dumped into a pond or barrel of water. These contests were more than drunken silliness. They reinforced bonds within the community, but also reminded everyone of the dangers of excess. In fact, chroniclers of the time often warned of the rowdiness that could spill over into violence after such competitions. It may be grim to modern sensibilities, but public executions were considered major spectacles. Markets filled with townsfolk eager to see justice carried out. Executioners became performers in their own right, sometimes prolonging the act for drama. Instead of jesters with monkeys and parrots, some medieval villages held quirky animal-based contests, such as frog-leaping races. Frogs were gathered and placed on the ground, and children, and sometimes adults, would cheer them on, trying to coax their frog across a finish line. Finally, hobby horse racing delighted both children and adults. Riders straddled wooden horse frames or fabric-covered poles, galloping in exaggerated fashion, while crowds laughed and cheered. This game reflected the medieval fascination with knights and cavalry, but transformed the seriousness of warfare into playful parody. Hobby horse games continued into later centuries, influencing folk festivals that survive to this day. Before battle, knights sought divine protection in the most tangible way possible, by swearing oaths on holy relics. These relics could be anything from a saint's bone to a fragment of the true cross itself. The belief was absolute. Breaking an oath sworn upon a sacred relic condemned the soul to eternal damnation. Some knights even carried relics into battle, sewn into tunics or hidden within scabbards, believing their faith would shield them more surely than steel. It wasn't just superstition, it was conviction. A knight's word was sacred, bound not only by honour, but by the will of heaven. Before being dubbed a knight, a young squire underwent a strange and solemn ritual, the knight's bath. This was no mere act of cleanliness. The candidate bathed in perfumed water overnight, symbolising purification of both body and soul. Candles flickered around the room as the squire kept silent vigil beside his armour, praying for courage, strength, and divine grace. By dawn he emerged reborn, cleansed of his former self, ready to bear the sword and uphold the chivalric code. In a world ruled by both sin and steel, this ritual marked the moment when a boy became a living instrument of faith and warfare. At dawn, before an audience of nobles and clergy, the lord who performed the dubbing struck the squire lightly on the neck with the flat of a sword, the symbolic collet. Then came the most intimate gesture of the ceremony, the knight's kiss. A sign of trust, loyalty, and brotherhood, it sealed the sacred bond between knight and lord. It was not a gesture of affection, but of unity, an oath that they would live, fight, and if needed die in each other's service. This moment of human closeness amid the pomp of war showed that the code of knighthood was as much about love, of duty, of God, of honour, as it was about battle. Knighthood was also bound by a darker kind of loyalty, the blood oath. In some accounts, knights swore eternal brotherhood by mixing drops of their own blood into wine and drinking it together. These blood feasts created an unbreakable bond, a vow that neither death nor distance could sever. The church frowned on such pagan echoes, but the practice persisted in secret among knights who trusted their comrades more than kings. It was loyalty beyond law, born in blood, sealed in faith. To the untrained eye, a knight's shield was merely decoration, but to those who could read it, it was a book of secrets. Colours, animals, shapes. Each bore hidden meaning. A red background signified courage, black meant vengeance or sorrow. A lion symbolised ferocity, while a broken spear could mean unfinished battle or a vow of revenge. Some noble families even embedded secret shame into their designs, reminders of betrayal or lost honour that only insiders could recognise. Heraldry was not just art, it was identity, legacy, and confession, written in colour and steel. For the wealthiest knights, faith came with them, literally. Many retained personal chaplains who travelled beside them in campaigns. These priests blessed their weapons, heard their confessions before battle, and sometimes even mediated with enemies under truce flags. They were spiritual bodyguards, ensuring the knight's soul stayed pure while his hands were stained with blood. It was a strange paradox of medieval warfare, faith and violence marching side by side, each believing the other justified its cause. Life for a knight was not only dangerous on the battlefield, it was haunted in the dark. Superstition ran deep. Many knights stitched small charms, prayers, or runic symbols into their bedding or underclothes. They believed this would ward off demons that preyed on weary soldiers in their sleep, the so-called night riders, or spirits of the unburied dead. In a world without medicine or psychology, dreams were seen as portals to the divine or the damned. A knight's rest, it seemed, was guarded as fiercely as his castle walls. We think of duels as fights to the death, but medieval trial by combat was more often a test of divine judgment. Each participant prayed before the fight, believing God would grant victory to the innocent. If one combatant was clearly beaten but not dead, the fight stopped, and the loser was declared guilty. But not all duels were noble. Some were staged by desperate peasants, or even women, claiming their innocence against terrible accusations. It was brutal justice, but in a world without certainty, people believed that God's will would show through steel. Spurs were more than just tools for riding, they were symbols of rank and pride. Golden spurs meant knighthood, silver or bronze denoted lesser standing. If a knight disgraced himself through cowardice or betrayal, his spurs were hacked off publicly with an axe. It was a humiliation worse than death. To lose one's spurs meant losing honour, and in the chivalric world, honour was everything. Though we picture knights as men of battle, many were men of words and prayer. They wrote poems to their ladies, treatises on morality, and meditations on sin and salvation. Some, like Geoffrey de Charny, tried to define the perfect knight, balancing courage, humility, and faith. To be a true knight wasn't only to fight well, it was to live rightly, to embody strength and virtue in equal measure. Their world was violent, yes, but it was also deeply philosophical, poetic, and spiritual. When on campaign, knights didn't always have the luxury of a warm bed. Many of them slept sitting upright, still clad in their armour, to be ready at a moment's notice if an attack came during the night. This was uncomfortable, but it kept them alive. Sleeping without armour left them vulnerable, a risk few knights dared to take when camped near enemy territory. Knights trained with weapons intentionally made heavier than the real thing. These practice swords, maces and lances built incredible strength and stamina, so when they switched to their actual gear in battle, the weapons felt light and fast. This clever trick of overtraining gave knights the endurance needed to fight for hours in grueling melees. A knight's warhorse was more than a mount, it was an investment. Some destriers, the most prized of all warhorses, were worth more than entire villages. These horses were trained for combat, able to bite, kick and even strike down enemies with their hooves, making them as dangerous as their armoured riders. Before heading into battle, knights often confessed their sins and received blessings from a priest. Death was always a possibility, and a knight wanted to enter combat spiritually prepared, not just physically ready. This ritual helped calm nerves and gave warriors a sense of divine protection. Some knights were so eager for glory that they went on chivalry tours. These were journeys taken specifically to seek out worthy duels and battles, proving their skill and building their reputation. In many ways, it was like a medieval quest for fame and honour. Tournament armour was far heavier than battlefield gear, designed for maximum protection during jousts. It was so heavy that squires often had to use small cranes or hoists to lift knights onto their horses. Falling off during a joust could be a humiliating and dangerous experience, as getting up on your own was nearly impossible. Knights often carried personal banners displaying their coat of arms, but many also hid secret symbols stitched into the fabric. These served as good luck charms or personal reminders, talismans meant to inspire courage and ward off death. Knights sometimes had relics sewn into their tunics or armour padding. These could be tiny fragments of saints' bones, pieces of the true cross, or blessed charms. Carrying holy items was believed to grant protection and favour in battle. Young boys training as pages, future knights, practised with wooden swords and hay-stuffed dummies called Saracens. These training exercises not only improved skill, but also subtly reinforced the idea of fighting non-Christian foes, preparing them mentally for the holy wars many would one day join. When a knight committed a great dishonour, his punishment could be the public stripping of his spurs. This was a humiliating ceremony where his knightly status was revoked. Losing one's spurs was worse than death for many, as it marked the end of their honour and identity as a knight. Knights sometimes staged pas d'armes, setting up barriers on roads and challenging travellers to duels for honour. Today, we're pulling back the visor on the world of medieval knights, from their private rituals to their most unusual training techniques. Before donning heavy chainmail, knights slipped into padded linen gambesons. But some didn't stop there. Wealthier knights had their underlayers stuffed or rubbed with fragrant herbs to hide the inevitable smell of sweat and steel. This wasn't just vanity. The fresh scent kept pests away and helped them stay presentable in courtly circles. Training wasn't just swinging swords at hay bales. One of the most iconic drills was the quintain, a rotating wooden target. The knight had to strike it with a lance at full gallop and dodge the sandbags swinging back toward them. Miss, and you might get knocked flat off your horse. A humiliating lesson in balance. Knighthood was expensive. Armour, horses, squires, servants, all could bankrupt a lesser noble. Some knights even took loans or sold land just to afford proper gear before joining a campaign. Being a knight wasn't just a calling, it was a financial gamble. Knights sometimes staged pas d'armes, setting up barriers on roads and challenging travellers to duels for honour. These events could last for days and became almost theatrical, equal parts sport, spectacle, and social drama. Some knights went beyond ordinary vows of loyalty, swearing personal oaths of brotherhood to one another. They exchanged relics, rings, or even pieces of armour as symbols of their bond, a private pledge to defend each other to the death. Armour didn't always gleam silver. Some knights had their suits painted black, red, or even gold to intimidate enemies and show wealth. The richest could afford mirror armour, so polished it flashed sunlight into the eyes of their foes. Knights trained to fight blindfolded, honing their ability to react by sound and instinct alone. This dangerous drill made them deadlier in the chaos of real battle, where visibility was often limited. Not all knights spent their lives in war. Some were hired as private escorts for groups of pilgrims, guiding them safely through bandit-infested roads and charging hefty fees for their protection. Knighthood wasn't just about blood and steel, it was also about culture. Many knights were troubadours, writing love poetry and music for noble courts, proving that a sword hand could also hold a lute. Knights were men of faith, but even they defied the church at times. When the Pope banned the use of crossbows against fellow Christians, knights risked excommunication if they disobeyed. Many, however, still used them in war. Survival came before salvation. Not every squire dreamed of becoming a knight. The title was an honour, yes, but it came with enormous expense. The ceremony required lavish banquets, gifts for fellow nobles, and armour that could cost more than a small farm. Some men quietly avoided knighthood altogether, content to remain skilled soldiers without the crushing financial weight of chivalry. Life inside armour was not glorious. It was suffocating. Helmets stank of sweat and metal, baking under the sun. To cope, knights sometimes lined their helms with herbs like lavender, thyme, or rose petals. This simple touch of comfort offered a small breath of humanity amid the chaos of war. Before modern military salutes, knights used a simple motion, raising two fingers to lift their visors. This gesture, revealing the face, symbolised peace and respect. Over time, it evolved into the salute still used by soldiers centuries later. Faith was a knight's unseen armour. Before battle, priests anointed swords and armour with holy oil, blessing them for divine protection. For many warriors, spiritual strength was just as vital as steel and courage. Chivalry was not merely a code of conduct, it was a sacred vow. A knight who fled from combat or betrayed his word could face excommunication from the church itself, condemning his soul as well as his reputation. Honour was more than pride, it was salvation. Certain knightly orders, such as the Knights Hospitaller, believed pain purified the spirit. Members might fast for weeks or wear rough hair shirts beneath their armour, using discomfort as a form of penance and devotion. For these men, discipline was holy. A knight's warhorse was more than an animal. It was his partner, his pride, and sometimes his only friend. To insult a man's horse was to insult his very honour. Chronicles tell of duels fought to the death over such slights. The gleam of a knight's armour came from less than noble methods. Squires used sand, vinegar, and even urine to clean steel, the ammonia stripping away rust and leaving the metal polished to a mirror shine. Behind every shining knight was a hard-working, foul-smelling squire. When a knight fell, his passing was honoured with grandeur. Some funerals included mock battles or tournaments fought in his name. It was both mourning and celebration, a way to ensure his bravery would never be forgotten. In an age obsessed with sin and salvation, dying honourably in combat was believed to cleanse the soul. For many knights, the battlefield was a holy place, a final trial where courage might grant the peace that confession could not, the shining symbols of honour, bravery, and duty. We often imagine them as flawless warriors clad in gleaming steel. But behind the polished armour and noble vows were men of flesh, superstition, and sweat, bound by strange customs and forgotten rituals. Today, we uncover 10 hidden truths about the knights of the medieval world that history rarely whispers about. To prevent the leather straps beneath their steel from cracking, they rubbed them with scented oils, often made from lavender, animal fat, or beeswax. It kept the armour supple, and the knights smelling faintly floral beneath all that iron. Before a boy could ever hold a sword, he had to master silence. Young pages serving noble households were often tested at banquets, ordered to serve in total silence, even when mocked or provoked. Those who broke their composure were dismissed. For knights, discipline began not in combat, but in quiet obedience. Knighthood wasn't all blood and duty. It was also filled with longing and romance. Many knights rode into battle wearing a lady's token, a handkerchief, ribbon, or embroidered sleeve. To some, these favours were sacred charms, to others bold confessions of forbidden love. Inside a knight's helmet, things got unpleasant. Padding was stuffed with moss, horsehair, or linen scraps, meant to cushion blows and absorb sweat. After long campaigns, these linings became breeding grounds for mould and lice. Some knights joked that the real battle was surviving their own stench. Despite their noble rank, many knights couldn't read the very oaths they swore. Their vows of loyalty and honour were often read aloud by priests, while the knights simply touched the parchment in silent agreement. The sword was their pen, their deeds, the only words that mattered. Before battle, knights would lean close to their shields, whispering prayers or secret phrases into the steel. It was said that courage could be bound into the weapon, turning fear into strength. Some even carved prayers or coded symbols along the inside rim, invisible to all but God and the knight who carried it. Sharp sound effect, a quick slap echoing in a hall. Forget the elegant sword tap. In some regions, a new knight's final trial was a hard slap across the face from his lord. The meaning was symbolic. This would be the last blow he'd ever receive without striking back. It was called the accolade, and it marked both humiliation and rebirth. Even the bravest warriors had their doubts. Before tournaments or battles, some knights secretly visited astrologers and fortune-tellers seeking signs of victory. They carried small charms, whispered prayers to Mars or St. George, and sometimes refused to fight if the stars warned against it. Not every knight served a noble cause. Mercenary knights, known as routiers, fought for whoever paid the most coin. Some changed sides mid-conflict, betraying their banners for gold. These freelances gave birth to the very word freelancer, soldiers without a master. When the blood and glory faded, some knights sought redemption. Haunted by violence, they turned to solitude, living as monks or hermits in quiet repentance. Their swords were traded for rosaries, their banners for prayer books. For these men, the final quest was not of conquest, but of peace. Medieval warfare was never just about swords and shields. It was a brutal game of survival, where creativity often mattered more than brute strength. Strange, shocking, and sometimes disgusting tactics gave defenders and attackers an edge in ways we rarely imagine today. Defenders didn't just pour boiling water from castle walls. Urine and animal fat were even more effective, clinging to armour and flesh with devastating results. Castle gates themselves could be smeared with dung, turning them into slippery, foul-smelling barriers, impossible for siege ladders to grip. Archers, the lifeblood of medieval armies, needed reliable weapons. To keep bowstrings supple in wet weather, some resorted to urinating on them, the salts helping preserve their tension in the rain. Disease became another weapon. Dead animals, and sometimes even human corpses, were hurled over walls by catapult, spreading panic and pestilence inside besieged fortresses. Even animals played their role. War dogs fitted with spiked collars and crude armour were unleashed to terrify horses and tear into enemy soldiers. Moats, meanwhile, were not always watery trenches of safety. They were often filled with hidden stakes, turning them into lethal traps. On the battlefield, communication mattered. Tiny scrolls tied to homing pigeons kept messages moving when all else failed. Soldiers themselves endured hardships, sometimes wearing padded linen soaked in vinegar beneath armour to ward off lice and fleas. And deception had its place too. Siege towers were occasionally disguised with painted canvas to look like ordinary houses, creeping closer before defenders realised the danger. Finally, even faith marched to war. Knights often carried saintly relics or bone charms, trusting divine protection to guard them when steel could not. Medieval justice was a spectacle. It was harsh, symbolic, and often deeply strange by modern standards. Punishments weren't always about fairness. They were about public shame, reinforcing authority, and sending a message to the entire community. Behind the castle walls and across small villages, law and punishment took bizarre forms. Bread was the cornerstone of medieval diets, and bakers carried immense responsibility. If a baker was caught cheating, selling underweight loaves or bread that was poorly made, they weren't simply fined. Instead, they could be forced to parade through the streets, carrying the very bread that betrayed their dishonesty. Sometimes they were tied to a cart or strapped to a wooden frame with the bad loaves hung around their neck. This public humiliation was designed to warn others: cheat the people, and your shame will be baked into history. Food in the Middle Ages was often tied to morality, and few creatures attracted suspicion like the eel. In France, authorities at one point banned eels because they were thought to inflame lust. While today we might find this absurd, it reflects how strongly medieval people connected certain foods with behaviour and sin. The eel, a slippery and mysterious animal, seemed to medieval minds like a dangerous temptation, one that could corrupt both body and soul. Some medieval punishments looked more like strange rituals than systems of law. Trial by cheese was one such method. The accused would be made to slice a piece of cheese before witnesses. If their hand trembled, even slightly, it was taken as evidence of guilt. To us it might sound laughable, but to medieval society, trembling was a sign that divine judgment was exposing the guilty. Justice, they believed, was in the hands of higher powers, and cheese was the instrument to reveal it. Facial hair was not merely fashion, it was a symbol of masculinity, dignity, and honour. To insult another man's beard was to insult his very identity. The consequences could be surprisingly severe. Some towns enforced heavy fines for such insults, treating them with the same seriousness as theft or property damage. This reveals just how closely tied personal honour and public respect were in the medieval world. Music was meant to bring joy, but if a musician played poorly or broke community rules, the punishment could be both bizarre and humiliating. Offenders were sometimes forced to wear a shame flute, a heavy iron collar shaped like a flute. They were marched through town wearing the contraption, mocked by onlookers and treated as a living example of disgrace. The punishment turned failure into a performance, where the real song was ridicule. When a person was convicted of murder, justice sometimes extended beyond death itself. In certain regions, the murderer was chained to their victim's body and buried together. This gruesome act was meant as both punishment and symbolism. The murderer could never escape the weight of their crime. Bound for eternity, their fate was sealed as a warning to others about the cost of bloodshed. War was not only expected, it was demanded. A man who refused to take up arms could face one of the strangest punishments, being forced to wear women's clothes in public. This humiliation struck at the core of medieval gender expectations, branding the man as weak and unworthy. For a society built on honour and martial duty, such punishment was not just ridicule, it was social exile. In some towns, habitual liars faced punishments designed to break their reputation forever. One such method was strapping the liar to a wooden wheel, which was then slowly turned while the crowd mocked them. The wheel was not always fatal, but it was deeply humiliating. Lies were seen as poison to communal trust, and such public shaming ensured the liar's words would never carry weight again. Resources were precious in the Middle Ages, and stealing them could mean devastating consequences. Firewood in particular was vital for survival. In some regions, pilfering wood from another's land could result in losing a hand. This punishment was not only brutal, but symbolic. The hand that stole was taken away, ensuring the thief could never repeat the crime. Justice was harsh because survival itself depended on order. One of the strangest and lesser-known punishments was the use of a stool of dishonour. Minor offenders, particularly those guilty of cheating in markets or disrupting town life, were forced to sit on a tall, brightly painted stool in the town square. Sometimes they were dressed in ridiculous clothing or made to wear signs describing their offence. Everyone passing by was invited to laugh, jeer, or throw rotten food. This punishment didn't draw blood, but it scarred reputations. Medieval punishments were more than penalties, they were performances. Each act of justice was staged for an audience, meant to terrify, humiliate, or inspire obedience. A medieval tavern, where the fire crackles, minstrels play, and tankards are filled with drinks that range from the familiar to the downright bizarre. Medieval taverns weren't just watering holes. They were the social heartbeat of villages and towns, where merchants struck deals, travellers traded tales, and peasants escaped the grind of daily life. But what exactly were they drinking? Some concoctions were hearty, others deadly strong, and a few so strange they would shock a modern palate. A popular tavern mix: hot ale or wine curdled with milk, spiced with nutmeg or cinnamon. Seen as comfort food in a mug, but the chunky texture was strange to modern taste. Often consumed as a late-night tavern drink, or medicinal cure for colds. Brewed with wormwood before hops became common. Bitter, almost medicinal taste later became the base herb for absinthe, thought to improve digestion, but also mildly toxic in large amounts. Hot wine or ale, whisked with egg yolks until thick. A strange, custard-like tavern drink, popular with both peasants and nobles. Served as both a warm beverage and a hangover cure. Half beer, half mead, a mix of malted ale and honey. Sweet, heavy, and very alcoholic. Taverns served it for feasts, considered a party drink for its intoxicating strength. Tavern goers often dunked stale bread into ale, letting it soak. Sometimes the bread was added directly to the drink, making it thick and mushy. Both food and drink in one, popular with poorer customers. Yes, it really contained a chicken, boiled chicken or cock meat mixed with ale, sometimes spiced with raisins and mace, believed to restore strength and boost vitality. Spiced wines weren't unusual, but pepper-heavy mixes were strange to the palate. These fiery tavern brews were reserved for the wealthy who could afford exotic spices, sometimes drunk warm, like an early version of spicy hot wine. Weak, low-alcohol beer brewed cheaply. Drunk by peasants, women, and even children because water was unsafe. Strange by today's standards, but it was the most common tavern drink. Seasonal taverns offered fermented birch sap as a springtime drink, slightly sweet, earthy, and unusual in flavour. Said to cleanse the blood and celebrated as a health tonic. Before hops, taverns used grute, mixtures of herbs like yarrow, juniper, or even henbane. Some herbs had hallucinogenic or narcotic effects. These tavern ales could leave drinkers dizzy, euphoric, or violently ill. Taverns in the Middle Ages weren't just about ale and mead. They were hubs of experimentation, blending local ingredients, medical theories, and sheer curiosity into the mugs of their patrons. The Middle Ages were not just a time of kings, castles, and crusades. They were also an age of deep superstition, where everyday life was ruled by strange beliefs and eerie customs. In a world without modern science, the line between truth and magic was blurred, and survival often meant keeping the spirits, demons, and curses at bay. This is the shadowy realm of medieval superstition. In the medieval imagination, cats weren't just mousers, they were creatures of mystery, feared for their supposed supernatural powers. Many believed a cat could sit on a sleeping person's chest and steal their breath, leading to illness or even death. This likely came from observing cats curling up for warmth. But in a world where nighttime suffocation was poorly understood, felines became easy scapegoats. It sounds grim, but some medieval folk swore by it. Rub a wart with the hand of an executed criminal, and it would vanish. The belief was rooted in the idea that death could absorb disease, transferring it away from the living. Graveyards and gallows became unlikely sources of folk medicine. While modern bouquets are about beauty and fragrance, medieval brides often carried garlic among the flowers. Not for flavour, but for protection. Garlic was believed to ward off evil spirits and jealous curses that might sabotage a marriage before it even began. A cheerful tune indoors might seem harmless, but in many medieval households, it was a dangerous act. People believed whistling inside called the devil into the home. The superstition may have stemmed from fears of summoning spirits, or from a practical belief that whistling was a sign of idleness, frowned upon in strict households. In some parts of Europe, women accused of witchcraft could be punished with a horrifying device: the witch's bridle, or scold's bridle. This iron mask, often fitted with a gag, prevented the wearer from speaking. It was believed to stop witches from casting spells, but in truth, it was a brutal tool of humiliation. In some towns, villagers would rush to light their fires on New Year's morning. The first smoke seen curling from a chimney was said to bring luck for the year ahead. Neighbours might even compete for the honour, believing it meant prosperity and protection. When building a house, some families would place a single worn shoe inside a wall, chimney, or under the floorboards. This wasn't forgetfulness. It was a deliberate charm, meant to trap or confuse evil spirits trying to enter the home. While game was a valued food source, some communities avoided hare meat entirely. It was linked in folklore to infertility, and eating it was thought to weaken a man's virility or a woman's ability to bear children. A sudden sneeze during a meal wasn't just a health concern, it was seen as a dark omen. Some believed it meant the devil was standing nearby, watching. Blessings after sneezes weren't just polite, they were protective spells. Pieces of rope used to hang a criminal were treasured by some as good luck charms. People carried small lengths in their pockets, believing they brought fortune and gambling, warded off sickness, or protected against the evil eye. To live in the Middle Ages was to live with one foot in reality, and the other in a world of spirits, curses, and unseen forces. In the twisted back streets of medieval cities, on the lawless country roads between castles and villages, brutal gangs ruled the night. These weren't just pickpockets or drunks, they were roving packs of criminals, con artists and mercenaries. The gangs of the Middle Ages were dangerous, clever, and sometimes even heroic. In modern times, a gang might be defined by turf, tattoos, or organised crime. But in medieval Europe, the term was much looser and often more violent. Medieval gangs came in all shapes. Some were bands of disbanded soldiers, hardened veterans left jobless after wars. Others were peasants driven to crime by famine and taxes. There were gangs of students, beggars, even rogue clergy. Some medieval gangs even wore livery badges, small pins showing allegiance to a noble patron or each other. It was a kind of gang symbol long before modern colours. They were rebels, survivalists, and sometimes weapons for hire. Places like London and Paris, where crime festered in the shadows of cathedrals and markets. In 14th century London, youth gangs called Roaring Boys and Rake Hells prowled the streets. These weren't idle troublemakers. They were violent, organised, and heavily armed. They fought rival gangs, trashed taverns, and beat strangers for fun or profit. In Paris, a group called the Coquillards was infamous in the 1400s. They posed as wandering monks or poor pilgrims, but behind that disguise, they were seasoned thieves, fraudsters, and highwaymen. They spoke their own secret language, called argot, and developed signs and codes to identify each other. If that sounds like modern gang slang, it is. Outside the cities, gangs took to the roads. The highways of medieval England were hunting grounds for some of the most feared outlaws in history. Meet the Foleville Gang, a band of armed robbers and assassins active in the 14th century. Led by Eustace Foleville, they kidnapped judges, robbed nobles, and assassinated corrupt officials. Incredibly, some of them were seen as folk heroes, fighting back against royal corruption. Another was the Cotterell Gang, made up of former knights and men-at-arms. They didn't just rob, sometimes they were hired to commit crimes. Think medieval mercenaries for illegal jobs. Both gangs were so notorious that the Crown launched full-scale military operations to hunt them down. There were key differences between urban and rural gangs. In cities, gangs ran extortion rackets, controlled markets and dominated taverns. They were enforcers, thieves, and bullies. But out in the countryside, gangs were raiders, setting ambushes, looting caravans, even attacking monasteries. In some places, even university students formed gangs. In Oxford, the Town and Gown riots of 1355 saw dozens of people killed when students and townsfolk battled for dominance. In 14th century London, a woman named Alice Strumpet ran a gang that lured nobles into romantic traps, then extorted them for hush money. In other parts of Europe, widows and female merchants joined criminal networks to protect themselves or profit during chaos. Cities and kings didn't sit idle. They fought back, brutally. Local authorities formed watches and hired mercenaries to patrol dangerous areas. Repeat offenders faced branding, mutilation, or execution. In England, a system called hue and cry forced every citizen to chase a criminal if they saw a crime. If you ignored it, you were fined. Some towns grew so desperate they'd pay gang leaders to leave. Others offered pardons in exchange for military service. In Switzerland, rebel gangs like the Googlers mixed political rebellion with highway robbery and became symbols of resistance. The legends of Robin Hood may have been based on real outlaw gangs who robbed corrupt nobles and shared with the poor. Poor communities often protected these groups, hid them, and even supplied them, especially when kings and lords seemed more corrupt than the criminals. Some became legends, some vanished into the darkness. But all of them remind us that where there's power, poverty, and chaos, there will always be gangs. Welcome to the towering walls and hidden chambers of the medieval castle. Beyond the battlements and beneath the banners, castle life was far more complex. This is castle life, behind the walls. Amid the stone and steel, every great castle had a patch of life, an internal garden. These green sanctuaries were more than decoration. They grew herbs for healing, roots for cooking, and flowers for fragrance. Some gardens were sacred spaces for quiet prayer, others private retreats for the noble ladies who ruled the domestic heart of the castle. Every well-fortified castle needed something far more important than just soldiers: a fresh water supply. Many castles had wells dug deep into the bedrock, sometimes located right in the centre of the courtyard. This wasn't just for convenience, it was survival. During a siege, access to clean water meant the difference between holding out and surrendering. Some castles even built secret tunnels to outside springs, protected by layers of stone and guards sworn to silence. The effort put into protecting water sources shows just how essential and vulnerable daily life inside the walls could be. Castles had toilets, called guardrobes, that projected from the walls above the moat or waste pit. These stone cubicles might seem primitive by today's standards, but they were clever. Waste dropped away from the castle, and sometimes herbs were hung inside to mask the stench. Still, they were cold, drafty, and hardly private. Often dismissed as mere attendants, ladies-in-waiting were highly educated women. They spoke multiple languages, managed correspondence, hosted guests, and helped organise everything from clothing to court ceremonies. Many were born of noble blood themselves, and sometimes wielded great influence behind the scenes. Falconry wasn't just a hobby, it was a status symbol. Castles had entire towers or enclosed areas dedicated to these majestic birds. Hawks, falcons, and eagles were trained for the hunt. A nobleman might be judged not just by his estate, but by the beauty and obedience of his bird. While knights fought with steel, castles fought pests with fur and feathers. Cats roamed the corridors, while owls nested high in the rafters. Together, they formed a living defence against rats and mice that could ruin grain supplies or spread disease. After a feast, you might think the food went to the poor immediately, but not quite. Noble households would often wait 3 days before distributing leftovers, believing this helped avoid waste. By then the food was stale, but for the peasantry it was better than nothing. Castle life was scheduled down to the hour. Servants woke before sunrise and were fined for being even minutes late. Duties included tending fires, preparing meals, managing supplies, and cleaning rooms, all under the strict eye of a steward or chamberlain. Before the printing press, scribes were essential. Castles often employed full-time scribes to copy legal texts, religious works, letters, and land deeds. Each document was written with painstaking care, quill in hand, candlelight flickering, mistakes erased with a sharp knife or a dab of pumice. Within many castles was a private chapel, and within those chapels, sacred relics. Bones of saints, pieces of holy cloth, even supposed fragments of the true cross were kept in ornate reliquaries. These items were believed to bring divine protection to the castle and its lords. Where spoiled food didn't just fill stomachs, it saved lives. Imagine vats of fish guts baking in the sun for weeks. That was garum, a salty, fermented fish sauce passed down from Roman times and still used in parts of medieval Europe. It reeked like death but added flavour and essential nutrients. Peasants, monks, even nobles poured it over meat, bread, and vegetables. It stank, but it stayed edible. Water could kill you. So people turned to ale, weak, warm, cloudy, and constantly bubbling. This was small beer, made from fermented barley. It wasn't refreshing, but it was safer than water. It fueled armies, fed children, and carried just enough alcohol to keep illness at bay. Cheese was never just cheese. Some varieties, especially in rural areas, were deliberately left to rot until they wriggled with life. Maggots helped break down fats, giving the cheese a soft, creamy texture. Disgusting? Maybe. But in an age without fridges, it was prized. Boiled eggs soaked in beer, and herbs lasted weeks, even months. The pickling brine fermented into a vinegar-like sludge, which preserved the eggs and added a sharp bite. Soldiers carried them, tavern-goers loved them, and the funk was just part of the package. Fresh milk spoiled fast, so they used it sour. Mixed with oats, barley, or rye, it became porridge. Add onions, herbs, maybe a scrap of bacon, and you had a meal. Children were raised on it. The sick survived on it. It was stomach-churning, but nourishing. Herring was shipped by the barrel across Europe. Salted, dried, and left to ferment, It arrived sticky, grey and pungent. But it lasted through winter, Lent and famine. The smell might have cleared a room, but it fed millions. Poor harvest? Eat what you can. Sometimes that meant mouldy rye bread, but one mould, Claviceps purpurea, caused ergot poisoning, vomiting, burning limbs, convulsions and visions. Entire villages were struck. People thought they were cursed. In truth, they were poisoned by rot they couldn't see. Rotten apples, pears or berries were mashed and left to ferment into vinegar. Mixed with herbs and honey, it became a drink to restore strength, settle stomachs, and even fight plague. Sour, sharp and mouth-puckering, it was both medicine and refreshment. Before probiotics had a name, people drank the cloudy, sour water from pickled cabbage jars. It kept digestion going during lean months and offered rare vitamins in winter. It was essentially medieval sauerkraut juice. And yes, it smelled like death. Soft cheeses washed in ale or cider developed a wet rind that oozed and stank. One ancestor of today's stinking bishop was so foul-smelling it was banned from some churches, but it packed fat, protein and salt into a transportable, long-lasting, nose-wilting bundle of survival. These foods may have smelled like death, but without them, many wouldn't have lived at all. From real dangers like wolves and thieves to spine-chilling tales of demons, ghosts and witches, let's uncover what really made the medieval nights so scary. Modern life is lit, literally. Street lamps, headlights, flashlights. We rarely experience true darkness. But in the medieval world, once the sun set, darkness was near total. Torches, candles and oil lamps gave weak and unreliable light. Most homes couldn't afford to burn candles all night. They were too expensive. And torchlight only reached a few feet ahead, making everything beyond a mystery. In many medieval villages, communal fires or watchmen were the only faint sources of light. Outside those, a void. For the average peasant, travelling after dark, even just a short distance, could mean falling into a ditch, being robbed, or worse. Night was the perfect time for crime. With no organised police force, villages were vulnerable. Roads were poorly patrolled, and forests or nearby ruins became hiding places for thieves and outlaws. Bandits would sneak into farms, barns, or even homes. Small villages often had no walls or defences, and locking your door was more hope than guarantee. In 13th century England, it was common for villages to appoint a night watchman, whose job was to patrol the streets and ring bells if danger was spotted. But even they were poorly armed and often fearful. In some areas, entire households would take turns staying awake, keeping watch with dogs or crude alarms. Beyond the criminal threat, there was another predator, nature itself. Wild animals, especially wolves and boars, prowled the forests around many medieval villages. Wolves were a very real threat in medieval Europe. In France, the problem was so severe that wolf hunters were employed and paid by the crown. Packs would sometimes come into villages during harsh winters, driven by starvation. Snakes, rats, and even bears in certain regions added to the dangers. A villager wandering into the woods at night might never return. It was common for people to hang herbs like rue or St. John's wort near their doors to ward off spirits. Some placed bowls of salt or iron near windows to keep evil at bay. Whispers told of revenants, the undead who returned to torment the living. Some villages buried suspected undead with rocks in their mouths or stakes through their hearts. Children were told to stay inside after dusk, or else they might be stolen by spirits or the Black Rider, a spectral figure found in many local legends. Isolation bred fear. Most villagers didn't understand what lay beyond the dark. Rumours filled the silence. A missing person became a tale of werewolves. A scream in the woods became a demon's laugh. There were no phones, no radios. Only stories passed down by candlelight villagers developed routines to fight the fear. Doors were triple locked. Dogs were kept inside or near entrances. Fires were carefully maintained to last until dawn. Bells were rung at twilight to signal the curfew, from the French couvre-feu, meaning cover the fire. Children were warned never to open the door after dark, no matter who knocked. Some villages even built prayer stones, or wayside shrines at crossroads to ward off evil spirits. Even then, safety was never guaranteed. Lemons were rare, expensive, and suspicious. Their acidity was thought to sour the blood and rot the stomach. Doctors warned they disrupted digestion and unbalanced the humours. While sometimes used in medicine, most avoided them in daily meals. Late to Europe, tomatoes were seen as dangerous. Their resemblance to deadly nightshade and their reaction with pewter plates caused real poisonings. Nicknamed devil's apples, they were blamed for illness, lust, and even death. Known as mad apples, eggplants were believed to cause insanity, leprosy, or demonic possession. Their bitter taste and dark colour made them suspicious, and some thought they stirred lust or mental instability. Garlic protected against evil, but it was also feared. Its strong scent and fiery nature were said to excite passions, overheat the blood, and disrupt spiritual purity. Monks often avoided it completely. Mushrooms were a deadly gamble. Edible and poisonous varieties looked alike, and without modern science, many feared them. Folk tales claimed they were food for witches or traps set by fairies. Fava beans killed some people without warning, a result of G6PD deficiency, unknown at the time. The cause was mysterious, so many blamed curses, sin, or divine wrath. Some monasteries banned them entirely. While cooked onions were common, raw ones were feared. Believed to inflame the spleen, rot the gut, and cloud the mind, they were often seen as disruptive to both health and behaviour. Leeks were avoided in religious life due to their link with passion and lust. Their strong scent and flavour were thought to inflame the blood, stir desire, and shame the soul. Used in cooking and medicine, caraway seeds were feared in excess. Said to cause strange dreams, madness, or sleep disturbances, they were also tied to spells, control, and enchantment. Parsnips were humble, but suspicious. Thought to be cold and moist, they were blamed for weakening the body, causing wind and disturbing the humours. Nobles often avoided them for being too rustic and rot-inducing. These once cursed ingredients are reminders of how strange and dangerous the kitchen used to be. Imagine you were born in 13th century France. You don't steal, you don't kill. But one day you whisper a dangerous idea. Maybe the church is wrong. That alone could get you tortured, excommunicated, or burned alive. In medieval times, heresy wasn't just a disagreement, it was treason against God. This is the story of what happened when your beliefs didn't match the church's, and why you wouldn't survive as a heretic. The word heresy comes from the Greek heresis, meaning choice. But in the eyes of the church, it wasn't just a choice, it was a rebellion. Heresy meant holding any belief that opposed official church doctrine. You could believe Jesus was purely divine, not human, and suddenly you were branded a heretic. Or say you questioned transubstantiation, the idea that bread literally becomes the body of Christ during communion. That was enough. In the early centuries, church councils, like the Council of Nicaea in 325 CE, defined what was true. Everything else was false and dangerous. But heresy wasn't just a spiritual issue, it threatened the church's authority. And when belief becomes power, belief becomes deadly. The medieval Catholic Church wasn't just a place of worship, it was the supreme authority on earth, governing education, law, land, kings, and souls. Defying the church wasn't just dangerous, it was suicidal. To the church, heresy threatened the very fabric of Christian society. Pope Gregory IX declared, "Anyone who lets a heretic live is himself a heretic." In the eyes of the faithful, heretics didn't just hold false beliefs, They endangered eternal salvation for everyone around them, and that justified extreme measures. In the 12th century, a quiet revolution was happening. Groups like the Cathars and Waldensians were growing, and they had ideas the church didn't approve of. The Cathars, for example, believed in a dualistic universe, a good spiritual God and an evil material world. They rejected wealth, war, and the church's corruption. That made them enemies of the state and enemies of God. In 1209, Pope Innocent III launched the Albigensian Crusade against them. Entire towns were slaughtered. A church leader was asked how to tell heretics from true Christians. He said, "Kill them all. God will know his own." To root out surviving heretics, the church created a new weapon, the Inquisition, a system of judges, friars, and secret informants devoted entirely to hunting and punishing heresy. If you were accused of heresy, you weren't given a lawyer. You weren't allowed to know who accused you. And silence, that was considered guilt. The church believed that confession was essential for saving your soul. And if you wouldn't confess willingly, they would help you. Torture was sanctioned by papal decree. You might be tied behind your back and hoisted by your wrists, at a technique called strappado, or stretched until your joints dislocated on the rack, or have your feet crushed in iron boots. The goal wasn't truth, it was obedience, and once you confessed, your fate was sealed. If the church found you guilty, there were consequences, some symbolic, some brutal. You might be forced to wear a yellow cross in public, or march barefoot through town while flogged, but the worst punishment was death by fire. Burning was seen as purifying, a way to cleanse the heretic's soul by destroying the body. It wasn't just about death, it was about spectacle. One of the most famous victims was Jan Hus, a Czech priest who criticised church corruption. He was promised safe passage to a church council, and then burned alive in 1415. Heresy wasn't just about theology, it was deeply gendered. Women, especially those who lived alone or practiced folk healing, were prime targets. By the late Middle Ages, heresy accusations blurred into witchcraft trials. The 1487 book Malleus Maleficarum declared that women were more susceptible to the devil. Entire villages were swept up in hysteria. These women weren't priests or theologians, but in a world where belief was tightly controlled, even midwives and herbalists became enemies of the faith. Over the centuries, many brave or foolish souls stood up to church power and paid dearly. Giordano Bruno believed in infinite worlds and a God beyond Catholic doctrine, burned alive in 1600. Joan of Arc claimed to speak with angels, tried and executed in 1431. William Tyndale translated the Bible into English so common people could read it, strangled, then burned. John Wycliffe died of a stroke, but the church later dug up his remains and burned them anyway. For these individuals, truth mattered more than life, but the price was eternal flame. In medieval Europe, heresy wasn't an act, it was an idea. One stray thought, one whispered doubt. That's all it took. Torture, confession, fire. The church offered salvation, but only if you obeyed, and so most stayed silent. Not because they believed, but because they wanted to live. The first step toward truth is the most dangerous. The longsword wasn't just a weapon, it was a symbol of knighthood and chivalry. But make no mistake, it was a killer. Typically weighing 2.5 to 4 pounds, with a blade up to 47 inches, it was deadly in both slashing and thrusting. Knights trained with longswords using manuals like the Fechtbuch, which included detailed kill techniques. Well-trained knights could pierce mail and even exploit gaps in plate armour. And with 2 hands on the hilt, the power behind each swing was terrifying. At over 6 feet tall, the English longbow was the sniper rifle of the medieval battlefield. It could fire arrows over 250 yards, and with enough force to penetrate armour at close range. Skilled archers could shoot 10 to 12 arrows per minute. At the Battle of Agincourt, English archers devastated the French, whose knights were bogged down in mud and cut down by volleys of arrows. The bow required years of training. Once plate armour became common, swords weren't always enough. Enter the warhammer, small, brutal, and perfect for cracking armour like an eggshell. One side featured a blunt hammerhead, the other a spike or beak to pierce helmets. It was designed not to cut, but to crush and puncture. In close combat, knights feared warhammers more than swords. The shock force alone could cause massive internal damage, even without breaking the skin. Easy to use, hard to stop, a peasant with a crossbow could kill a knight. Crossbows could fire bolts at 300 plus feet per second, with enough force to pierce chainmail and even plate. Unlike the longbow, it required minimal training. Point, aim, shoot. The Catholic Church once tried to ban crossbows for use against Christians due to how deadly they were, calling them too inhumane for warfare. The poleaxe was the Swiss army knife of medieval war, a combination of axe, hammer and spear. It could be used to hook riders off horses, smash helmets, or stab through visors. Usually about 5 to 6 feet long, it gave reach, leverage, and sheer destructive power. It was so effective that even knightly tournaments used them, in full armour no less, often resulting in severe injuries or death. Medieval battles weren't just fought man to man, they were fought castle to castle. And the trebuchet was the king of siege weapons. Capable of hurling 90-kilogram stones over 300 metres, it could reduce walls to rubble. Some hurled rotting corpses or diseased animals to spread plague. The largest trebuchets could take weeks to build, but delivered destruction with bone-rattling impact. Don't let the poetic name fool you. The Morning Star was pure pain. A spiked ball attached to a handle or a chain allowed it to strike over shields or around defences. The spikes pierced flesh, shattered bones, and could not be easily parried. Despite myths, the chain version was rare in war due to its unpredictability, but fixed-head Morning Stars were real and horrifying. Some weapons weren't designed to kill, but to capture you alive, and that could be even worse. Meet the Man-Catcher, a rare but terrifying pole weapon used to snare knights and drag them off horses or out of battle. Its pronged, spring-loaded cage clamped around the body, neck, or limbs, trapping victims without piercing them. It was ideal for taking prisoners, especially nobles worth ransoming. Once caught, escape was nearly impossible, especially if multiple soldiers rushed you at once. Though not common on the battlefield, man-catchers were used in riot control, castle arrests, and even papal bodyguard duties. Capture often meant torture, ransom, or public execution. If armour was your shield, the horseman's pick was your curse. A variant of the warhammer, this weapon had a long, narrow spike, capable of piercing plate armour like a can opener. Its short handle made it ideal for mounted combat, delivering crushing force with precision strikes. Unlike swords, the horseman's pick didn't glance off metal. It punctured, often embedding so deep it had to be pried out. Even a glancing blow could cause crippling concussions or internal bleeding. The dagger may seem small, but in medieval combat, size wasn't everything. The rondel dagger, with its narrow, tapered blade, was used to finish off wounded knights, thrust into gaps in armour. In close quarters, daggers were lethal tools of execution. Some knights carried multiple daggers for different uses: combat, utility, or even mercy killing. This was the final weapon when all else failed. In the medieval world, you didn't need an army to kill an enemy, just a floorboard, a rope, or the right pressure plate. Or swords clashed and arrows flew on the battlefield. A deadlier threat lurked in the silence waiting. Traps, ingenious, ruthless, invisible. From crumbling castles to cursed teams, traps were the silent assassins of the Middle Ages. And if you triggered one, you'd never have time to react. Step into the wrong passage and a walk become a weapon. Hidden behind stones or ornate carvings, the spring-loaded traps were brutally efficient. Activated by a simple step or a brush of a tripwire, the sparks didn't warn, they didn't miss. These traps are fast, fatal, and often silent. And deep within vaults or guarding religious relics, their engineering was impressive as their cruelty. Nothing says go back quite like a giant swinging blade. Mounted to ceilings and walls, these scythe-like death machines were powered by counterweights and precise geometry. Set off by a loose stone or hidden cord, they'd cut intruders in half in one sweeping motion. Some blades were serrated, others poisoned, and left a second chance. Not all floors were meant to be walked on. Trapdoors were the medieval world's most deceptive execution method. Triggered manually or by pressure, the floor would collapse into oubliette spike pits or underground rivers. Many who fell were never seen again. These weren't just traps, they were silent sentences. Sometimes the smallest traps caused the greatest suffering. Caltrops, tiny iron devices, were scattered across roads and gates. No matter how they landed, one spike always pointed up, perfect for crippling cavalry, slamming armies, or guarding escape routes. Step on one, and you wouldn't walk again. The chest gleams with gold, but not every treasure was a reward. Some were traps in disguise. Booby-trapped chests protected valuables from thieves. Inside, crossbow bolts, acid flasks, even collapsing floors. Greed wasn't just dangerous, it was fatal. One wrong turn, and the lock bites back. Poison needles traps with deadly booby traps inside hidden door mechanisms. The thief would never know until it was too late. The poison, belladonna, hemlock, or something worse. Sometimes death came in minutes, sometimes hours of agony. In the ancient world, the sealant didn't just protect you from the weather, it was a weapon. Remove the wrong relic, and the entire slabs of rock would come crashing down. Quake, heavy, final, no warning, no mercy. Some traps didn't kill with blades, but with silence. Enter the wrong chamber, and the air itself would become your executioner. These rims sealed from the outside, the oxygen gone in minutes. These suffocation chambers were cruel, slow, and terrifyingly effective. Sometimes your escape was the trap. Collapsing stairs and false bridges were engineered to betray trust. A delayed tripwire, broken chain, you were falling into the void. Built into keeps, towers, and cliffside strongholds that made sure no one was left alive. One trap was deadly, but two, unstoppable. Medieval engineers didn't stop at a single threat, they layered horrors. Every step calculated to maim, terrify, or kill. The psychological impact. Enemies didn't just fear battle, they feared the hallways, treasure rooms, even the doors. Without mercy, traps were the unseen executioners. Long before modern doctors, medieval villagers turned to herbwives, local women who specialised in healing with plants. These women, often older and highly experienced, gathered and cultivated herbs like yarrow, mugwort, rosemary, and comfrey. They brewed teas, made salves, and applied poultices to treat everything from fevers to infected wounds. Their knowledge was passed down orally, generation to generation, rooted in both folk tradition and practical observation. Some even acted as midwives, guiding childbirth with herbal remedies and whispered prayers. But their role came with risk. In periods of social unrest or religious paranoia, herbwives were among the first accused of witchcraft. Despite this, they were essential figures in rural communities, quiet guardians of health, in a time when hospitals didn't exist for common folk. Think your job stinks? Try being a gong farmer. These workers were hired to empty cesspits and privies, often at night, crawling into toxic spaces, armed only with a shovel and a lantern. Despite the filth, the danger from disease and gas buildup made it one of the best paid jobs among labourers. During the Black Death, plague buriers became a grim necessity. These men were hired to collect and bury the dead, sometimes in mass graves. But the job was short-lived. Many plague buriers fell ill themselves and ended up in the very pits they helped dig. Lime was essential for mortar, plaster and agriculture, and lime burners were the ones who made it. Their job involved superheating limestone in massive kilns, a dangerous process that could lead to burns, lung damage or explosions. Still, their product was in high demand. Before pest control was a profession, medieval towns had rat catchers. These individuals used trained ferrets, dogs or even cats to chase down rats. Crucial in a time when plague and disease spread quickly. Some even carried rats as proof of their success and let customers inspect their catch. With no newspapers, town criers served as living media. They shouted out royal decrees, local news, and lost property notices. Paid by the word, town criers had strong lungs and sharp memories. They were also protected by law. Attacking one was a serious offence. Not to be confused with bowyers, fletchers crafted the arrows used by hunters and soldiers alike. A good fletcher's work could mean life or death on the battlefield. Their skills were highly specialised, and they often passed their trade down through generations. Tanners worked with animal hides in disgusting conditions, using vats of dog urine and animal brains to break down the material. The smell was unbearable, and tanneries were usually located on the edges of towns. Still, leather was in constant demand, making this a necessary, if reviled, occupation. Grain was the backbone of medieval diets, and millers controlled its processing. Their apprentices could spend 7 to 10 years learning the trade, eventually inheriting the position or starting their own mill. With control over flour came power, and sometimes suspicion. Millers were often accused of skimming off the top. Toothaches didn't wait for modern medicine. Tooth drawers were travelling showmen who set up in town squares, offering to yank rotten teeth for a few coins. They used pliers, brute force, and little hygiene. It was painful and dangerous, but people were desperate for relief. Long before agricultural science became formalised, medieval peasants understood the need to rest their soil. They practiced a rudimentary form of crop rotation, planting different crops in different fields each year to avoid exhausting nutrients. Typically, this three-field system involved rotating between a grain crop, a legume, like peas or beans, and a fallow field left to recover. This simple method increased yields and helped prevent famine, proving that peasant wisdom often matched, or even exceeded, the era's official science. When food was scarce or just bland, peasants turned to nature for flavour and nutrition. Wild herbs like nettles, sorrel, dandelion greens and purslane were gathered regularly. These plants added vital vitamins and minerals to diets dominated by bread and gruel. Nettles, though stinging when fresh, became a vitamin-rich soup ingredient once cooked. Peasants passed down foraging knowledge orally, teaching which plants healed, which seasoned, and which were poisonous. Without refrigeration, medieval people relied on smoking to preserve their meat and fish. Small smokehouses, often shared between families, would use low, smouldering fires and herbs like rosemary or juniper to flavour and dry the meat. This process could take days, but it kept food edible for weeks or months. Smoked herring, bacon, and salted eels were staple proteins during long winters. Peasants often used Y-shaped dowsing rods to locate underground water. While modern science doesn't support its effectiveness, at the time, this was a trusted method. Many believed the rods reacted to water's energy, guiding the dowser's hands to hidden springs or wells. Whether magic or luck, it helped communities dig wells in the right places more often than not. Medieval resourcefulness meant reusing everything. Hollowed-out gourds became natural water bottles, while pig bladders were cleaned, inflated, and tied off to carry liquids. Though it may sound unappealing today, these vessels were lightweight, waterproof, and, best of all, free. Travellers and shepherds often relied on such makeshift containers during long days away from home. Stinging nettles used as fabric fibre. Though painful to touch, stinging nettles were a valuable resource for medieval peasants. Once harvested and soaked, the tough stems could be broken down into fibres and spun into thread. The result was a coarse but durable fabric that could be woven into sacks, ropes, and even clothing. This clever reuse of an otherwise irritating plant made nettles a surprisingly important survival tool in resource-scarce areas. In peasant households, nothing went to waste. Animal bones were sharpened into needles or awls, hides were tanned for clothing or shoes, and even sinew was dried and used as thread. Bone splinters could insulate walls, and hides could be stretched over window frames. These practices show the deep ingenuity of rural life, where every part of a hunted or slaughtered animal served a purpose. In some villages, peasants crafted dome-shaped clay beehives called skeps to keep bees for honey. Honey wasn't just a rare sweetener, it was used to treat wounds and soothe coughs, while beeswax was essential for making candles in homes without natural light. Keeping bees was a delicate but rewarding process, and hives were often carefully placed near wildflowers or herb gardens to ensure good yields. Keeping bugs off food wasn't easy without modern screens or sprays. Peasants used smoke, smouldering herbs and damp wood to deter insects inside their homes. Hanging garlic near pantries and beds was another common practice, believed to repel not just flies but evil spirits too. These techniques were part of everyday domestic knowledge, passed on primarily by women and rooted in both observation and superstition. To survive long, cold winters, peasants had to prepare well in advance. Root vegetables like turnips, carrots and onions were stored in deep-root cellars, holes dug into the earth where temperatures stayed cool and stable. Grains were kept in clay pots, sealed with wax or animal fat to keep out moisture and pests. These storage methods were simple but remarkably effective, and could mean the difference between hunger and survival. Every suit of armour began not with metal, but with stone. The primary ingredient? Iron ore. Dug from the earth, it was loaded, crushed and refined in primitive but effective furnaces known as bloomeries. Inside these furnaces, a combination of iron ore and charcoal was heated to staggering temperatures. The charcoal wasn't just fuel, it was essential. It provided the carbon necessary to transform iron into something harder and more resilient. Early medieval steel was inconsistent. Some armour was soft and prone to bending. But by the late medieval period, Europe had developed carbon-controlled steel, a more durable, flexible metal ideal for protective gear. Master armourers often sought out imported metal from Toledo, Spain, or even Damascus. These regions were famed for their finely forged steels, known for their strength and workability. Without the right steel, a knight's armour could buckle under a sword's blow. While blacksmiths made tools and bladesmiths forged weapons, armourers had a singular purpose: to craft the protective exoskeleton of war. Their workshops were marvels of medieval engineering. At the heart was the forge, blazing hot, fed by bellows and charcoal. Nearby, heavy anvils anchored the workspace. Surrounding them were racks of tools, each with a unique purpose. Raising hammers were used to mould metal over curved stakes. Planishing hammers smoothed and thinned the plates. Shears cut raw sheets into shape. Swage blocks helped shape joints and channels with precision. Armourers didn't work alone. It was a guild profession, often passed down through families. The master armourer led the design and final detailing, while apprentices did the heavy hammering, polishing, and fitting. Some workshops were so prestigious that their marks were sought after across kingdoms. And many armourers worked in teams, not just for speed, but because armour wasn't just metal, it was mathematics, anatomy, and art. A single suit of armour could take weeks, or even months to finish, and each one had to fit like a second skin. Once the right steel was ready, it was time to bring it to life. The first step: heat. The steel was placed in the heart of the forge until it glowed a brilliant red-orange. hot enough to be malleable, but not molten. At this temperature, it could be shaped with precision, but only by experienced hands. Using heavy hammers and brute strength, armourers began to hammer the plates into rough shapes. But this was no guesswork. Templates, often made of parchment or wood, were laid out in advance, designed to match the knight's body exactly. After all, armour was no off-the-rack affair. Each piece was shaped for movement and protection, curved to deflect blows and tailored to the knight's unique frame. Two of the most essential techniques were raising and dishing. Raising involved hammering the steel over a rounded stake to create domes, ideal for helmets, pauldrons, and breastplates. Dishing did the opposite, hammering into a concave form to sink the metal into a bowl shape. It was loud, it was hot, it was back-breaking. But slowly, the rough steel became something greater. The iconic knight's armour was always made to order. No two suits were the same. A wealthy knight might travel hundreds of miles just to be fitted by a famous master armourer. Armourers used rivets, small metal pins, to connect overlapping pieces. Some rivets were tight, locking pieces into a solid shape. Others were loose, allowing articulation, the ability to move and pivot. Flexible joints at the elbows, knees, hips, and shoulders were critical. The solution? Floating rivets, sliding rivets, and carefully stitched leather straps, each part allowing controlled motion without sacrificing defence. Chainmail was also integrated for areas that required more mobility, like the underarms and groin. These mail and plate hybrids offered the best of both worlds, flexibility and protection. It's no wonder some suits featured over 1,000 rivets, each placed by hand. One mistake, and a joint could seize, or worse, leave a gap vulnerable to a well-placed sword thrust. These rivets were often hidden, polished smooth, or even shaped like tiny roses in ceremonial armour, functional engineering disguised as art. Next came polishing. Using abrasive stones, pastes, and even powdered pumice, armourers and apprentices spent hours removing hammer marks and forging scars, turning dull grey steel into a mirror-like finish. Polishing wasn't just for looks. A smooth surface helped deflect blades and was less likely to catch mud or grime in battle. But for many knights, especially the noble and the wealthy, armour also had to dazzle. Etching used wax designs, symbols, heraldry, even animals and religious scenes, etched into steel using mild acid. The acid ate into the exposed metal, leaving intricate, permanent patterns. High-ranking knights took it further, commissioning gilded accents, silver overlays, enamel details, and stamped crests. Their armour shone like trophies. Steel alone doesn't make armour strong. It had to be tested, again and again. To ensure a suit could withstand the chaos of battle, armourers often performed proof testing. This wasn't metaphorical. They literally attacked the armour, striking it with swords, axes, and occasionally even firing arrows or early firearms at it. If the armour withstood the force, the maker would leave a small symbol stamped onto the plate, a proof mark. You'll often find these on the breastplate, where a knight was most vulnerable. These marks weren't decoration. They were a signature of trust, proof that the suit wasn't just beautiful, but battle-ready. Still, strength alone wasn't enough. A full suit had to strike the delicate balance between durability and weight. Most late medieval plate armour weighed between 45 to 60 pounds, no more than the gear of a modern firefighter or soldier. And so from the raw iron buried deep within the earth, to the roar of the forge, to the last gleaming rivet, a suit of armour was born. In the age of castles and catapults, it wasn't just sword or shield that shaped history. It was the armour, and the masters who made it. Forget basic bread and cheese. Medieval royalty dined like gods. From rare imports guarded like treasure to dishes so complex they required their own rituals, food was far more than fuel. It was power. It was pageantry. It was politics. Eggs weren't just breakfast. They were royal building blocks of luxury cuisine. Boiled, baked, stuffed with saffron and almond milk, or wrapped in gold leaf, eggs symbolised fertility and divine favour. Special breeds of hens were kept just for royal households. Some kitchens used over 1,000 eggs per feast, and egg-based dishes were so prestigious that they often appeared at coronations. Before cow's milk was common in noble diets, almond milk was king. Smooth, rich and shelf-stable, it was used in sauces, stews and desserts. Almond milk was so prized that kings imported almonds by the ton. During Lent, when dairy was banned, almond milk kept royal dishes rich and creamy, without violating religious rules. Aspic was edible art. Meat stock was boiled until it jellied, flavoured with herbs and poured into ornate moulds. Some jellies encased flowers, birds, or whole-cooked fish. Royal chefs crafted illusion foods, gelatinous sculptures that looked like jewelled relics or even landscapes, meant to dazzle guests and intimidate rivals at the table. From cranes to herons, medieval kings hunted or imported exotic birds for their tables. But peacocks were the crown jewel, roasted then dressed in their own plumage and beak. These were served not for taste, but as trophies, a show of dominion over nature and wealth. Swans, meanwhile, were often royal property, marked with ownership notches on their beaks. Eels were fatty, abundant and easy to preserve. Kings consumed them fried, jellied or baked in elaborate pies shaped like dragons or shields. Eels were so valuable, they were used to pay rent and taxes. One English monastery owed the crown over 500,000 eels a year, and you can bet many ended up on royal plates. Pine nuts were small but mighty, used in everything from sauces to sweets. Their subtle, creamy flavour was perfect for rich medieval dishes. Because they had to be laboriously harvested by hand from tough pine cones and transported long distances, pine nuts were more expensive than some spices and treated like edible pearls. These Middle Eastern imports were often mashed into spreads, candies, or added to meat dishes for a sweet savoury mix. Figs were seen as a symbol of wisdom and prosperity. Royal apothecaries praised them as health foods and aphrodisiacs. Kings gifted fig and date treats to favoured allies and visiting envoys as edible diplomacy. Kings loved floral flavours. Rosewater and orange blossom syrups were drizzled over pastries, meats and even rice. They were fragrant, exotic and extremely costly. These ingredients were so luxurious that entire court gardens were devoted to cultivating roses and bitter oranges, solely for royal kitchens and apothecaries. Hippocras was a luxurious spiced wine, enjoyed warm or cold, often served at the end of royal meals. It was made by infusing red or white wine with a mixture of cinnamon, ginger, cloves, sugar, and sometimes rosewater. Named after the ancient physician Hippocrates, this drink was thought to aid digestion and extend life. It was so revered that special Hippocras chambers existed in royal households, and the drink was typically reserved for high-ranking guests. The preparation itself was ceremonial. Wine was filtered through a Hippocrates sleeve, a cone-shaped cloth bag, and presented in silver goblets with great flair. More than candy, marzipan was edible propaganda. Shaped into animals, saints, or entire battle scenes, these almond sugar sculptures were centerpiece desserts for royal banquets. Highly skilled artisans were employed just to make marzipan art. Some pieces were painted with natural dyes and cost more than a knight's yearly salary. To eat like a king in the Middle Ages meant more than full bellies. It meant showing the world your wealth, wisdom, and power. By the 9th century, blacksmiths had become essential to every community. They weren't nobles or clergy, but they held a special place of respect. The forge was often located near the village centre, or next to a stable or barn. Why? Because where animals worked, iron was always needed. The blacksmith was the community's problem solver. A broken plough could cripple a harvest. A snapped blade could mean death in battle. So essential was his work that, in some areas, blacksmiths were even exempt from certain feudal duties. Many blacksmiths doubled as farriers, shoers and caretakers of horses. In a world where hoofbeats were the heartbeat of war, trade and travel, this made the smith even more indispensable. Step inside the medieval forge and you enter a world of heat, hissing and hammering. Every inch had a purpose. At the heart was the hearth, a charcoal-fueled fire so hot it could melt iron. The bellows, often made from leather and wood, fed oxygen to the flames and required constant attention. A large anvil, usually mounted on a tree stump, served as the smith's workbench. Then there were the tools, the flatter to smooth metal, the fuller to shape grooves, the hardy set in the anvil to cut hot metal, and the swage block, a sort of mould for making curves and standardised shapes. To harden the work, the smith quenched it in water or oil, producing that satisfying hiss we all know. In larger operations, especially near rivers, blacksmiths used trip hammers, massive water-powered hammers that could flatten metal faster than any man. Each tool had its own rhythm, each movement a dance between fire and force. The forge wasn't just functional, it was a theatre of transformation. A blacksmith's life was not easy. Days began at dawn and the work was relentless, physically demanding, scorchingly hot, and often dangerous. Every day brought new challenges. A farmer needed a scythe repaired, a carpenter needed nails, a traveller's horse threw a shoe. Sometimes a soldier came by with a sword that needed sharpening, or reforging. Most blacksmiths had help, usually 1 or 2 apprentices, who started young, sometimes as early as age 12. They learnt not just technique, but the rhythm of the forge, the feel of metal, the timing of heat, the art of endurance. Many forges were family-run. Wives kept the books, helped with sales, and even managed small repairs. Daughters sometimes learned the craft too, though they rarely received formal credit. He crafted and maintained the tools that fed the people. Ploughshares for turning soil, scythes for harvesting grain, axes for felling wood, hoes for planting crops, cauldrons, spits, knives, latches, hooks, all forged by hand, made to last. Many tools weren't sold for money, but bartered, exchanged for food, wool or firewood. The economy of the medieval village was one of trust and trade, and some of these tools were so well made they were passed from father to son. A plough that fed generations, a knife that carved countless meals. Not every blacksmith made weapons. Bladesmiths and armoursmiths were often specialists. But the village blacksmith, he was the battlefield's mechanic. He crafted spearheads and arrowheads, simple swords and battle axes, shield bosses and knife blades. During wartime, his forge rang day and night. Soldiers depended on him. A dulled sword or a cracked helm could mean the difference between victory and death. Some smiths became so skilled their blades were sought after by lords and knights far beyond their village. And occasionally, they inscribed their weapons with mystical runes, symbols meant to protect the wielder or curse the enemy. In fire, the blacksmith gave birth to the tools of survival and destruction. While the blacksmith was vital for tools and weapons, he also had a gentler side, a side that created beauty from brute force. Many smiths took pride in artistic work. They forged decorative gates and railings, hinges, locks and window bars with scrolling motifs, chandeliers, candle holders and church fittings. In some towns, blacksmiths were commissioned by churches or wealthy patrons to create ironwork for cathedrals or castles, an incredible honour and source of income. In medieval minds, the blacksmith held mystical power. He could bend metal, tame fire, and create what no one else could. Folklore swirled around the anvil. In Norse myth, Waylon the smith was a legendary figure. Kidnapped by a king for his skills and later exacting revenge using his craft. In other stories, the blacksmith outwitted the devil himself, tricking him with red-hot iron or trapping him in a horseshoe. Some smiths were believed to have healing powers, particularly for iron-related ailments like blood heat or injuries caused by metal tools. In many villages, the blacksmith acted as a minor doctor. Burnt iron filings mixed with wine, horseshoe water, or the heat of the forge were sometimes used in folk remedies. When war loomed, the blacksmith's role became even more critical. Suddenly nails gave way to arrowheads, ploughshares became pikes. During conflicts, whether regional feuds or major invasions, local smiths worked day and night to equip militias. They repaired broken armour, forged spear tips, and fixed wagons for fleeing families. Some blacksmiths travelled with armies as campaign smiths, setting up mobile forges to keep weapons sharp and horses shod. Becoming a blacksmith wasn't just about strength, it was about patience, discipline, and years of training. Apprenticeships typically began around age 12. The boy would live with the master smith, learning everything from tending the hearth to crafting his first nails. Mistakes were common: burns, bruises, even scars. But over time, the apprentice learned the secrets of tempering, welding, and shaping. After 5 to 7 years, an apprentice could become a journeyman, travelling between towns to work in different forges, gain skills, and eventually submit a masterwork to join a guild. Guilds ensured quality, trained the next generation, and protected the reputation of the trade. And once accepted, the smith could open his own forge, perhaps with his own apprentice at his side. In the medieval economy, the blacksmith was both craftsman and merchant. While some accepted coins, many preferred barter, tools traded for grain, repairs paid with wool, or knives swapped for chickens. In the Domesday Book of 1086, smiths are specifically listed in many English villages, highlighting just how essential they were to daily economic life. Whether trading, repairing, or commissioning large projects, the blacksmith was a central figure in the heartbeat of commerce. The medieval blacksmith made the tools that built the castle, shoed the horse, forged the sword, and mended the plough. He was a figure of strength, skill, and the essential part of the community. We all know about mead and meat pies, but the medieval world had a sweet tooth too. Perry jelly was a shimmering treat made from fermented pear juice and honey, thickened into a wobbly jelly. The wealthy often spiced it with cinnamon or clove and poured it into moulds shaped like animals or shields. Perry was considered safer to drink than water, and when turned into jelly, it became both medicine and dessert. Frumenti may sound humble, but on feast days it became something magical. This sweetened wheat porridge was enriched with milk, eggs and honey, then topped with dried fruits like figs, raisins and dates. It was traditionally served at Christmas and even accompanied roasted venison during noble feasts. Comfits were the original medieval candy. Fennel, aniseed or coriander seeds were coated in layer after layer of hardened sugar. They were believed to aid digestion, so much so that nobles carried boxes of comfits to banquets and handed them out like party favours. Apple muse was thick, warm and fragrant, a sort of medieval applesauce pudding. Apples were stewed with wine, breadcrumbs and spices like cinnamon and ginger. This dessert was often used to soften stale bread, turning food waste into a sweet, elegant dish. Lèche Lombard was a sliceable custard made from almond milk, honey, and exotic spices like mace and saffron. It looked like fudge but tasted like a warm, nutty pudding. This was a favourite among the nobility, with versions recorded in the 14th century English and Italian cookbooks. Pain perdu, essentially medieval French toast, soaked in egg and milk, fried in butter, then topped with honey or sugar. In a time when wasting bread was unthinkable, pain perdu was a clever and delicious solution. Tarte de Brie was made from soft, ripened cheese, like brie, mixed with eggs, sugar, and spices inside a pastry shell. It was creamy, savoury, and just sweet enough to be served as dessert. It blurs the line between sweet and savoury, much like modern cheesecake. A fleeting spring delight. Elderflower fritters were made by dipping whole blossoms in batter and frying them crisp. Once cooked, they were dusted with sugar or drizzled with honey. Elderflowers bloom for only a short time, so these fritters were a rare seasonal treat, often linked to fertility rituals. Sucket was the medieval answer to fruit candy. Fruits and peels were boiled in sugar syrup with spices, creating sticky, spiced jewels served in ornate bowls. Suckets were served with special silver sucket forks, early utensils for sweets. Chairisai, or cherry eyes, was a rich pudding made from cherries, wine, honey and rice flour. The result was thick, smooth and deeply flavourful. Medieval cooks believed red fruits promoted good health and balanced the humours of the body. Wafers were thin, crispy cakes often eaten with warm spiced wine or fruit syrups. They were a treat for special occasions like weddings or church feasts. They were sometimes printed with religious or noble insignias, a medieval take on edible branding. Doucettes were luxurious egg custards sweetened with honey and perfumed with rosewater or saffron. Baked gently, they had a smooth, almost silky texture. The name comes from the Old French doucet, meaning little sweet thing, and it was often served at the end of high feasts. In medieval times, personal hygiene wasn't what we'd expect today. Bathing was rare for many commoners, partly due to limited access to clean water and the belief that water could carry disease into the body. Soap was handmade from animal fats and ashes and considered a luxury item. Wealthier households might bathe once a week, but for peasants it was often only a few times a year. Despite popular myths, people did try to stay clean using cloths and herbs, but body odour was a part of daily life. While we might picture fluffy loaves of golden bread, most medieval bread was far from appetising. Wheat was expensive, so commoners baked with rye, barley, or oats. In lean times, bakers even added crushed tree bark or ground beans to stretch their flour. This sometimes caused digestive issues or even poisoning. Nobles, by contrast, enjoyed fine white bread called manchette, baked from pure wheat flour and often served with honey or butter. Salt was more than a seasoning in the Middle Ages. It was wealth. Known as white gold, salt preserved meat and fish, making it crucial for survival, especially in winter. At grand feasts where a person sat in relation to the salt cellar marked their rank. Nobles and honoured guests sat above the salt, closer to the host, while servants and lower status individuals were seated below the salt. Its value was so great that Roman soldiers were once paid in salt, giving us the word salary. Medieval evenings were dark, literally. Most homes didn't have windows, and when the sun went down, people relied on candles or oil lamps for light. But candles weren't the scented luxury we know today. They were often made from tallow, a rendered animal fat, which produced thick smoke and a strong odour. Only churches and the very wealthy used beeswax candles, which burned cleaner and brighter. For many, bedtime came shortly after sundown to save on lighting. While cats and dogs were kept for companionship or pest control, medieval households, especially noble ones, sometimes had more exotic pets. Falcons were prized by the upper class, not only for hunting but also as a symbol of status. Monkeys, squirrels, and even songbirds like nightingales could be found in wealthier homes. These animals were often pampered and even featured in medieval art and literature. Meanwhile, in rural communities, animals like goats and pigs sometimes served dual roles: livestock by day, companions by necessity. The bond between people and their animals, whether practical or affectionate, played a quiet but meaningful role in medieval daily life. A single night's sleep wasn't the norm in the Middle Ages. Historical records suggest that people followed a segmented sleep pattern: first sleep and second sleep. After going to bed at dusk, people would sleep for a few hours, wake around midnight, pray, read or even visit neighbours, and then go back to sleep until dawn. This pattern matched the natural rhythms of candlelit life and limited daylight. It also allowed people quiet time for reflection in the middle of the night. In medieval times, oral hygiene was quite different from today. People often used herbs like parsley, mint and rosemary to freshen their breath after meals. Chewing these fragrant herbs helped mask the strong odours caused by less frequent toothbrushing and the heavy diets of the time. Some even made homemade mouthwashes using vinegar or wine infused with herbs. While they lacked modern dental care, these natural remedies were an important part of daily life to maintain some sense of cleanliness and social etiquette. Medieval people did take some care of their teeth. While toothbrushes didn't exist, people used frayed sticks or cloth to rub their teeth clean and remove debris. Interestingly, skeletal remains from the period show relatively healthy teeth, likely due to a lack of processed sugar. Names in the medieval world carried deep meaning. They often reflected a person's trade, like John Smith, location, Alice of York, or a personal trait, Geoffrey the Bold. Nicknames were widely used, especially when multiple people shared the same first name. A Thomas could become Thomas the Miller, Tom Short, or Tomkin. Some surnames stuck for generations, becoming the last names we still use today. While peasants struggled to get enough food, noble banquets were lavish and long-lasting. Feasts were held to celebrate religious holidays, marriages, and military victories, and they didn't end after one course or one evening. Some lasted several days, featuring dozens of dishes, musicians, jugglers, and entertainers. Moulded jellies were served alongside dramatic centerpieces, like pies filled with live birds. These grand spectacles reinforced the wealth and status of the host. What if I told you the medieval diet wasn't just meat, mead, and mouldy bread? Hidden in the pages of ancient manuscripts and castle garden records are fruits you've likely never tasted, fruits that once sweetened royal feasts, flavoured potions, and filled the bowls of peasants and kings alike. Today we're peeling back the centuries to rediscover 12 forgotten fruits of the medieval world. The medlar is the medieval fruit that needed to rot before it could be eaten. Sounds gross? Actually, it's a process called bletting, where the fruit softens and sweetens after harvesting. Once bletted, it has the texture of applesauce and a flavour often compared to spiced dates or baked apples. Shakespeare called it open-arse fruit because, well, take a look. Medlars were a delicacy in Tudor England and often featured in pies and preserves. They also symbolised decay and time, making appearances in poetry and art. Looking like a lumpy apple and smelling like perfume, the quince was once more popular than apples themselves. Too tough and sour to eat raw, quinces were cooked into jellies and pastes like membrillo, still loved in Spain today. In medieval Europe, quince was also prized for its medicinal properties. It was believed to aid digestion, sweeten breath, and even strengthen the heart. Also known as Juneberries, these small blue-purple fruits taste like a mix of blueberries and almonds. They were often foraged by villagers and baked into rustic tarts. Their name may come from Appalachian funerals. Service berries bloomed when the ground thawed enough to hold burial services. Sloe berries are as medieval as chainmail. These tart fruits from the blackthorn tree were turned into syrups, vinegars, and the ancestor of modern sloe gin. People never ate them raw. They're far too astringent. Instead, they were steeped in alcohol or sweetened with honey to bring out their deep, plummy flavour. The cornelian cherry may look like a cranberry, but its taste is tangy and citrusy, like sour cherry and lime. Popular in Byzantine and Eastern European cuisines, this fruit was often made into jams, fermented drinks, and even pickled. Romans loved it too. Legions carried the tough wood for spears and the fruit for energy. Mulberries were so beloved in the Middle Ages, some monasteries cultivated them for their sweet juice and for silkworms, which feed exclusively on mulberry leaves. The black mulberry, in particular, was eaten fresh, dried, or turned into wine, and they stain everything. a symbol of fleeting beauty and often linked to ancient myths like Pyramus and Thisbe. Tiny, tangy, and electric red, barberries were prized for their zing. Used in medieval sauces and syrups, they also served medicinal purposes, especially for fevers. Though banned in some areas due to a link to wheat diseases, they remained popular in kitchens and gardens until forgotten by modern diets. Damsons are the dark horse of the plum family. Tart and tannic, they were perfect for stewing with meat, making jams and even flavouring ale. The name may trace back to Damascus, suggesting a long journey from the Middle East to the English orchard. Yes, jujubes are real fruit, not just chewy candy. Known as the Chinese date, they were brought to Europe via the Silk Road. Dried, they're chewy and date-like. Fresh, they're crisp and apple-like. Medieval herbalists valued them for calming the nerves and aiding sleep. The strawberry tree, or Arbutus unidu, was said to be eaten once because the taste was forgettable. But these fruits were fermented into wines and liqueurs by monks and foragers. It's one of the few fruits that ripens in autumn and blooms at the same time, making it a symbol of rebirth and duality. Rowan berries were more than food, they were magic. Medieval people believed the tree protected against witches and evil spirits. When cooked, the bitter berries made excellent jelly, often paired with game meats. In hard times, they were dried and ground into flour substitutes. Also called the wild service tree, this fruit tastes like dates and malt after bletting. Checker fruits were fermented into a kind of rustic cider or ale, and inns named the Checkers across Britain reference this very tree. They were so culturally tied to drinking that they lent their name to the Chancellor's residence, Chequers. And though many faded from our tables, they still grow in hedgerows and old gardens, waiting for curious minds to rediscover their taste. We've all heard of medieval meat pies and mead, but what about the vegetables that filled the tables of castles, monasteries, and peasant homes? Today we're looking into history to unearth 12 forgotten vegetables of the medieval world. Some were culinary staples, others medicinal marvels. All are rare in modern kitchens. Skirret, funny name, serious flavour. This sweet white root, with its mild taste reminiscent of carrot and parsnip, was a favourite in medieval kitchens. The name skirret comes from the Dutch suikerwortel, or sugar root, a nod to its natural sweetness. Boiled, roasted, or even fried in batter, skirret was considered a delicacy of the elite. Charlemagne reportedly demanded it in his royal gardens. It's a perennial too, meaning once planted, it fed people for years. With a name fit for royalty and a nickname of poor man's asparagus, Good King Henry was a reliable wild green. This plant was often foraged near homes and farms, leading it to be one of the earliest homegrown vegetables of Europe. Its young shoots were eaten like asparagus, while the mature leaves were cooked like spinach. Before celery ruled the kitchen, there was Alexander's. Grown by Romans and passed on through the medieval period, this bold, peppery herb flavoured everything from soups to salted fish. It was so popular that it was often planted along monastery walls, and nearly every part is edible: root, leaf, stem, and flower. Recognise the name rampion. You might know it as Rapunzel. Yes, that Rapunzel. In the fairy tale, her mother craved this plant so badly, she risked everything. That's because rampion's root is nutty and tender, and its leaves can be eaten raw or cooked. It was such a valuable salad plant that theft from noble gardens was not uncommon. Don't let the appearance fool you. Scortonera, also known as black salsify, has a creamy oyster-like flavour when cooked. Its name means viper's herb in Spanish, due to its supposed ability to treat snake bites. Once considered a cure for the plague, it was a prized root in both culinary and apothecary gardens. Blanched and buried in sand, sea kale shoots were a coastal treasure. This seaside vegetable was a staple in monastic gardens, especially in the British Isles. In Victorian times, it made a comeback and was considered a gourmet delicacy in Britain. What if you could eat your parsley from the bottom up? Parsley root is a forgotten cousin of the common herb, cultivated for its white, aromatic root. Used in broths, stews, and even sweet dishes, it had a parsley meets carrot flavour. Medieval cooks favoured it over carrots, in regions where orange carrots had yet to dominate the field. While we still eat turnips, the greens often go to waste, but in the medieval world, they were essential. Boiled, pickled, or sautéed with vinegar and spices, turnip tops were rich in nutrients and flavour. Turnip greens were so valued that crop rotation systems were designed in part to ensure their steady supply. Strong, savoury, and celery-like, lovage was the medieval MSG. Used to flavour broths, meats and sauces, it was also brewed into teas and digestive tonics. Monks planted it widely for both food and medicine. Think lettuce is just for salads? Meet cheltus, a variety grown for its crunchy, juicy stem. It was often peeled and stir-fried, and its mild, nutty flavour made it popular in Asia and parts of southern Europe. Though cheltus faded from European fields, it's still popular in Chinese cuisine today. With a taste like sweet chestnuts and parsnip, chervil root was a prized winter food. It was slow to grow but stored well, ideal for lean months in medieval climates. This root was so delicate in flavour that nobles reserved it for fine stews and feast day dishes. We still use the root to spice up our roasts, but in medieval times, horseradish leaves were just as important. Their peppery bite added kick to meat pies, sausages, and fresh salads. Beyond food, horseradish was thought to cure everything from scurvy to snake bites. Truly a hot commodity. From castle banquets to peasant stews, these vegetables once fed medieval Europe with flavour, variety, and vital nutrients. Welcome to the chaos and charm of the Middle Ages. We will explore the myths, monsters, and mysteries from medieval times. These legends shaped real beliefs, inspired crusades, and defined times. While the sword in the stone tale might sound far-fetched, many historians believe the legend was inspired by an actual war leader from the 5th or 6th century. This mysterious figure supposedly led British forces against Saxon invaders, laying the foundation for centuries of Arthurian legends. To medieval minds, dragons weren't just fantasy, they were facts. Bestiaries and maps marked unexplored lands with warnings like "Here be dragons." Caves, mountain ranges and distant islands were all fair game for dragon sightings. Elves, goblins and fairies were not the magical helpers we think of today. Back then they were blamed for stolen children, sudden sickness, or strange happenings in the woods. Folklore was filled with warnings of these dangerous beings. The Holy Grail wasn't just a symbol of divine power, it was the ultimate medieval obsession. Knights of the Round Table, including Sir Galahad and Sir Lancelot, were said to seek this mystical chalice, believed to hold the blood of Christ. The search became a metaphor for purity, sacrifice, and divine favour. Medieval people truly believed in revenants, restless spirits or walking corpses. Ghost stories were not just spooky tales, but moral warnings about unresolved sins, improper burials, or divine punishment. Unicorns, manticores, and even the dreaded basilisk appeared in real medieval texts. Scholars of the time included them in encyclopedias, treating them as exotic animals rather than mythical monsters. These travelling performers kept legends alive, spinning tales of heroism, betrayal, magic, and war. Their stories were entertainment, history, and moral lesson all rolled into one. Merlin wasn't just a magician in stories. Some medieval people believed he had actually existed and possessed prophetic powers. Chronicles and religious texts sometimes referred to him as a sage who foresaw great wars and the rise of kings. The tale of Beowulf slaying Grendel and a fire-breathing dragon is one of the earliest surviving epic poems in English. While clearly legendary, it also reflects the real warrior culture of early medieval Scandinavia and England. A solar eclipse wasn't just a natural event, it was a warning. Medieval people believed celestial signs were divine messages. Comets could signal the death of a king. blood moons foretold war. The sky was, quite literally, the news. The medieval world wasn't just built on stone and steel. It was built on stories. Legends weren't just entertainment. They were how people explained the unexplainable. Which legend do you believe has some truth to it? Battles were often decided by cavalry. Heavily armoured knights on trained warhorses could break enemy lines with sheer force, making them the backbone of medieval armies. While longbows were powerful, many medieval battles were decided through disciplined formations like shield walls. Lines of soldiers stood shoulder to shoulder, shields locked together, creating a human barrier that could withstand cavalry charges and incoming arrows. Strength in unity was key. Sieges were long, painful campaigns. Castles were assaulted with catapults, battering rams, and siege towers, some sieges dragging on for months until starvation forced surrender. Medieval armies didn't just rely on brute force, they also got creative with fire. Archers used fire arrows to set siege equipment, and enemy camps ablaze, and early forms of gunpowder were sometimes packed into small devices to create chaos and confusion during battle. Before full suits of plate, knights wore chainmail. Flexible and protective, it covered most of the body, but wasn't foolproof against heavy strikes from maces or axes. Crossbows were so powerful, they were banned by some religious leaders. Though slower to reload, their armour-piercing bolts made them one of the deadliest weapons of the age. Castles were built for defence with moats, drawbridges, and thick walls. Designed to withstand even the most determined attacks, they were a nightmare for invading armies. Not all soldiers fought for honour. Many were mercenaries. These hired swords fought for coin and could even betray their employers if the price was right. Warhorses weren't just transportation. They were trained for battle. They could kick, bite, and trample enemies, making them a powerful asset in the chaos of war. Even in wartime, peace had its moments. The church imposed truce days, banning combat on Sundays and religious holidays in an attempt to curb constant bloodshed. Winter in medieval times was brutal, and for peasants, survival depended on their homes being as warm as possible despite their simple construction. These dwellings were small, one-room structures made of wattle and daub, a framework of woven wooden strips covered in a thick layer of mud, clay, and straw. This method provided basic insulation, though walls often cracked, allowing cold drafts to seep through. The roofs, made of thatch, were packed tightly with dried straw, offering some protection from the elements, though leaks and infestations were common. The heart of every peasant home was the hearth, which served as the sole source of warmth and a cooking area. Fireplaces lacked chimneys, so smoke filled the room, before eventually escaping through small openings in the walls or the thatched roof. This made the air thick and difficult to breathe, irritating eyes and lungs. To combat the cold, families huddled around the fire, absorbing as much heat as possible. To improve insulation, peasants stuffed straw and mud into wall gaps and hung thick cloths or animal hides over doors and windows to block out the wind. Some homes had wooden shutters that could be closed at night for extra protection. During especially harsh winters, livestock such as cows, sheep, and chickens were brought inside, providing additional warmth through body heat. At night, staying warm was a priority. Families slept together in a single bed under layers of wool blankets or furs. Reed and rush flooring provided insulation against the cold ground, with some homes incorporating dried herbs like lavender for freshness. Those who could afford it used raised wooden platforms or straw mattresses, avoiding the damp and frigid earth beneath them. Despite the harsh conditions, medieval peasants adapted their homes to retain warmth, making small but crucial adjustments that ensured their survival during the coldest months. Clothing in medieval times was not just for modesty or protection, it was a critical tool for survival. Peasants relied on layers to keep warm, with wool being the most common material. Woolen tunics and cloaks were worn throughout the winter months, providing insulation against the cold. Tunics were long and loose-fitting, allowing additional layers underneath, while cloaks fastened at the neck provided extra coverage. Fur, though largely reserved for the wealthy, found its way into peasant clothing in small amounts. Those who could afford it lined their mittens, boots or hats with fur to provide warmth. For the rest, wool remained the primary defence against the cold. Hoods and hats were essential, as heat escapes rapidly from the head. Many wore woolen caps or hoods with long tails that could be wrapped around the neck like a scarf, offering extra insulation. Beneath their outer layers, peasants typically wore linen underclothes, which helped wick moisture away from the body. Staying dry was crucial, as damp clothing could lead to illness. Footwear options were limited, leather shoes were expensive and wore out quickly in muddy conditions. Many relied on wooden clogs or simply wrapped their feet in rags, stuffing them with straw or wool to keep warm. A particularly useful feature of medieval winter clothing was the inclusion of removable layers. Some garments were designed with inner linings that could be added or removed as needed, allowing peasants to adjust to fluctuating temperatures. This practical approach to dressing allowed them to stay warm while maintaining mobility for daily work. Surviving the winter required careful planning and food storage. Without modern refrigeration, peasants relied on time-tested preservation methods to ensure they had enough to eat. Meats were salted, smoked, or dried to prevent spoilage, while root vegetables like turnips, carrots, and onions were stored in underground pits lined with straw to keep them fresh. Grains such as barley and rye were stored in sacks and used for making bread and porridge throughout the season. Drinking water was risky due to contamination, so ale was the primary beverage. Even children drank it, as the fermentation process made it safer than water. Though weak in alcohol content, it provided essential calories and warmth. To avoid running out of food, peasants practiced fasting and rationing. Meals were carefully portioned, and every bit of food was used efficiently. This meant reusing bones for broth, stretching ingredients into soups, and finding creative ways to make supplies last through the long months of scarcity. The agricultural cycle slowed significantly, leaving only a few hardy crops like cabbage, leeks, and root vegetables, which could still be harvested from frozen ground. This limited yield became a crucial supplement to their stored food for survival through the cold months. With the fields frozen and many tasks on hold, peasants turned their efforts inward. A significant portion of the day was devoted to maintenance work, repairing buildings, fixing tools, and ensuring that homes were weatherproofed against the harsh winter elements. The bitter cold made fires essential for warmth and cooking, so gathering firewood became one of the most important chores. Every able-bodied member of the household, from the elderly to the children, would help gather what little dry wood could be found. The constant effort to stockpile fuel kept everyone occupied, but it was never truly enough to last the entire winter, requiring regular trips to the forest or woodpile. Another necessary task in winter was caring for livestock. Without access to fresh pasture, feeding animals became more difficult, and the winter diet of hay and grain was not always sufficient. Peasants spent time ensuring that the animals, cows, sheep, goats, and pigs, had enough food to survive the season. Though some animals, like chickens, could be kept in small coops near the warmth of the hearth, others were housed in barns where constant attention was required to prevent frostbite or illnesses. The cold months also offered peasants the time to complete indoor tasks that had been put off during the busy harvest season. Women would spin wool, weave fabric, and mend clothing that had been worn thin during the previous year. Clothes were carefully patched up to avoid any waste, as any fabric, thread, or cloth was precious. Shoes, often worn until the soles were worn through, were repaired by cobblers or by the peasants themselves. The need for warmth extended beyond clothing. With less work to be done outdoors, social life became crucial in maintaining both physical and mental health. Peasants gathered in the evenings around the fire, telling stories, singing songs, and sharing news. Families would visit each other, exchanging food, drink, and occasionally small gifts. The communal nature of life was not just a way to pass the time. These gatherings helped to preserve the social fabric of the community, offering much-needed companionship in the otherwise isolated and bleak months. Villages often had communal ovens where families could bake their bread. These ovens were places of warmth. The smell of baking bread would fill the village, and for a brief moment, it provided a respite from the cold. Bread was often shared, with each family contributing to the oven schedule, ensuring that everyone had something to eat. While most foraging and hunting was halted by the deep snow, peasants still ventured out when necessary. Small game, such as rabbits and squirrels, could be found in the woods. Birds, including pheasants and ducks, might also be trapped or hunted. However, the bitter cold and scarcity of resources meant that many peasants simply relied on stored food. Salted meats, preserved vegetables, and dried fruits became staples of the winter diet. With fewer opportunities for fresh produce, the monotony of winter meals could sometimes be overwhelming. The tight-knit nature of the village meant that people depended on each other in times of need. When one family ran low on firewood, others would share their supply. If one household had excess grain, they might trade it for wool, firewood, or other supplies. This system of bartering was essential to survival. There was no reliable cash economy for peasants, and many villagers lacked the luxury of money, so exchange of goods and services was their primary means of acquiring what they needed. Monasteries and churches played a pivotal role during the cold months. Not only did they provide spiritual guidance, but they also served as safe havens for those who had nowhere else to turn. The poor, the sick, and the elderly often found shelter in the church or the abbey, where they could receive a meal and warmth. Churches would often hold masses or offer prayers for favourable weather and the health of the community. Some monasteries even maintained large storerooms filled with grain and dried meat, which they distributed to the needy. Festivals were another vital aspect of winter survival. Despite the grueling conditions, religious celebrations like Christmas and Twelfth Night provided peasants with a much-needed break from the hardships of the season. These festivals were filled with food, drink, dancing, and singing. They were a brief respite from the cold and isolation, reminding people of their shared humanity and the promise of spring. Superstitions also played a large role in winter survival. Many peasants believed that the harshness of winter, illness, and even bad harvests could be influenced by supernatural forces, offering prayers to saints, burning special herbs, or lighting candles at particular times were all ways to ward off evil spirits. Some would also hold rituals at the winter solstice, hoping for a prosperous and mild year ahead. The cold weather, combined with the lack of sunlight and limited nutrition, made medieval winters a breeding ground for illness. Peasants were particularly vulnerable to diseases like pneumonia, colds, and coughs. The long dark nights led to a rise in frostbite and other cold-related injuries, especially for those who had to work outdoors. Medieval medicine was rudimentary at best, and many illnesses went untreated or were wrongly diagnosed. Colds and fevers were often seen as punishments from God or the result of spirits. Village healers or herbalists would concoct various remedies using herbs like thyme, rosemary, and garlic. These remedies were thought to have medicinal properties, but often they were little more than soothing concoctions to ease discomfort. Warm teas made from honey, ginger, and elderberry might offer some relief from cold symptoms, and poultices made of crushed herbs were applied to sore throats and aching joints. In addition to herbal remedies, some peasants believed in charms or spells to stave off illness. A simple charm, an offering of bread, or a prayer to a saint was often as effective as any remedy. The belief in divine protection was strong. Many peasants prayed for health, guidance, and protection during the long, cold nights. The winter months could also bring outbreaks of more serious diseases, such as the plague, which could spread quickly through tightly packed villages. Without modern antibiotics or vaccines, villagers could do little to prevent or treat the spread of disease. It was often the most vulnerable, children, the elderly, and the weak, who succumbed to illness first. Death from cold, hunger, or disease was a constant threat in these months. Though the winter months were long, cold, and harsh, the faith of the peasants helped them to endure the darkness, knowing that eventually the warmth of spring would return. The medieval world was a place where justice was often brutal, unfair, and terrifying. From bizarre trials to horrifying executions, the punishments of the time reflected a society that believed suffering could reveal the truth. If someone was accused of a crime, they didn't get a fair trial. Instead, they faced trial by ordeal. This could mean holding a red-hot iron, walking across burning coals, or being thrown into a freezing river. If they survived or healed quickly, it meant God had judged them innocent. If not, their guilt was proven, and they were punished, often by execution. For lesser crimes, people were put in stocks or pillories, wooden frames that locked their heads and hands in place in the town square. There they were pelted with rotten food, mud, and even stones by angry crowds. This punishment wasn't just about suffering, it was meant to shame criminals so they wouldn't repeat their offences. Anyone suspected of witchcraft faced torture, forced confessions, and execution. Many were burned at the stake or hanged. Some trials used the ordeal by water, where the accused was thrown into a river. If they floated, they were guilty. If they sank and drowned, they were innocent. Either way, survival was unlikely. Believe it or not, animals could be charged with crimes like destroying crops, attacking people, or even stealing. There are records of pigs being executed, goats being put on trial, and even insects being sentenced for damaging harvests. These trials were taken just as seriously as human cases. While peasants were punished for the smallest crimes, nobles often had private armies and could ignore the king's laws. They settled disputes with bribery, duels, or outright violence. If a noble did commit a crime, they were more likely to be banished or fined rather than executed. Poisoning was a serious fear, especially among the wealthy. To protect themselves, kings and nobles hired food testers, people who took the first bite of a meal to make sure it wasn't poisoned. If the tester survived, the food was considered safe. If not, well, it was time to find a new tester. Instead of going to court, people could fight to prove their innocence. Trial by combat was a legal way to settle accusations. Whoever won was considered right in the eyes of the law. Even minor disputes could be settled with swords, and sometimes the fight was to the death. Stealing wasn't taken lightly in the medieval world. Even petty theft, like stealing a loaf of bread, could lead to a harsh punishment, including hanging. The idea was that harsh penalties would scare people into obedience, but it often meant poor people faced death for minor crimes. Making fake coins was one of the worst crimes a person could commit. Since money was directly tied to the king's power, counterfeiting was seen as an act of treason. The punishment? Being thrown into a cauldron of boiling water or oil. Some trials were based entirely on pain and survival. In ordeal by fire, the accused had to carry a burning hot object. If their wounds healed, they were innocent. In ordeal by water, the accused was tied up and tossed into a river. If they floated, they were guilty. If they sank, they were innocent, but often drowned. Grab your sword, strap on your armour, and let's ride into battle. Think castles were just grand stone homes. Think again. Defending a castle was brutal, and one of the sneakiest defences was murder holes. These were gaps in the ceiling where defenders could dump boiling oil, molten lead, or even rocks on invaders trying to storm the gates. If you ever wanted to take a swim in a medieval moat, don't. Most castle toilets, called garderobes, were simple stone seats with holes, leading directly into the moat. Yep, the same water that protected the castle from enemies was also filled with human waste. So if you were a soldier sieging a castle, not only were you dodging arrows, but you were also standing next to a giant medieval toilet. Becoming a knight wasn't just about wearing cool armour and swinging swords. It took a lifetime of training. Boys as young as 7 years old became pages, working under knights and learning basic combat skills. By 14, they became squires, training harder, polishing armour, and assisting in real battles. If they survived all that, they were knighted around age 21. No participation trophies here. If you couldn't keep up, you were out. Ever heard the myth that knights in full armour couldn't move? That's completely false. A full suit of plate armour weighed 80 to 100 pounds, but it was so well designed that knights could run, climb, and even do somersaults in it. Some knights even wrestled and fought on foot in full armour, proving that they weren't just walking tin cans. Jousting wasn't just a sport, it was a death match on horseback. Two knights charged at full speed, aiming their lances to shatter on impact. Even though they used blunt lances, knights often died from broken necks, concussions, or even splinters piercing their eyes. In one famous case, King Henry II of France was killed in a joust when a lance splintered through his eye socket. Talk about a painful way to go. The longbow was one of the deadliest weapons of the Middle Ages. Unlike short bows, these could pierce knight armour from over 200 yards away. At the Battle of Agincourt, 1415, English longbowmen decimated the French knights, proving that you didn't need heavy armour to win battles. You just needed a really, really big bow. Castles were built for defence, but if things got too dangerous, lords had hidden tunnels to escape a siege. These tunnels, called sally ports, led to secret exits beyond the castle walls, allowing defenders to sneak out, surprise the enemy, or even escape unnoticed. So if you ever feel trapped, just remember, medieval lords had a backup plan. Not all knights served kings, some joined mysterious warrior orders. The Knights Templar, Teutonic Knights, and Hospitallers were elite warriors sworn to protect pilgrims and fight in holy wars. Many of these knights became legendary, with some believing they guarded sacred relics like the Holy Grail. Their secrets remain shrouded in mystery, with some even inspiring legends of hidden treasure. Forget soccer or basketball. If you were a noble in medieval times, your favourite sport was hunting with falcons. Falconry was a status symbol, with trained birds hunting rabbits, pheasants, and even small deer. Only the wealthiest nobles could afford rare falcons from the Middle East, making them a prized possession in medieval courts. Think of it as having a luxury sports car, except it's a bird. Dogs and horses were common nightly pets, but some took it to the next level. They kept bears as pets. Knights returning from wars sometimes brought back exotic animals. Some even trained bears for hunting, or had them fight in tournaments for entertainment. Imagine riding into battle with a trained war bear. Now that's medieval madness. Medicine in the Middle Ages was questionable at best. If you were sick, your chances of survival depended more on luck than actual science. Let's take a look at some of the wildest medical practices and superstitions of medieval times. Feeling sick? Just drain some blood. Bloodletting was one of the most common treatments for everything. Fevers, headaches, infections, you name it. The idea was that illnesses were caused by an imbalance of bodily fluids, so removing blood would rebalance the body. Problem was, it often made people weaker, or even killed them. Believe it or not, medieval doctors tasted urine to diagnose illnesses. They believed the colour, smell, and taste revealed a patient's condition. Imagine walking into a doctor's office today and being handed a cup of pee for a taste test. Yeah, hard pass. The Black Death was the deadliest pandemic in history, wiping out nearly 50% of Europe's population in just a few years. But what caused it? Some believed it was bad air, others blamed angry gods or even witchcraft. People carried flowers or burned herbs to purify the air, none of which helped, of course. These guys, they weren't just creepy, they believed their beaked masks, stuffed with herbs, would protect them from the deadly disease. Spoiler alert, it didn't. Ever had a headache so bad you'd drill a hole in your head? Well, medieval doctors did just that. This practice, called trepanning, was meant to release evil spirits causing mental illness, seizures, or migraines, and somehow, people survived this. Before modern medicine, many treatments were a mix of herbs, magic spells, and crushed gemstones. Yup, some believed powdered gems could cure disease, while others relied on charms and prayers to heal. Let's just say medical school wasn't really a thing back then. Forget modern hospitals. Medieval ones were more like shelters run by monks. They provided food and a place to rest. But actual medical care? Not so much. If you got better, great. If not, well, prayers were your best hope. Believe it or not, people thought that kings had healing powers. It was called the king's touch, and rulers were believed to cure diseases like scrofula just by laying their hands on the sick. Did it work? Probably not. But hey, it gave people hope. Of all the bizarre treatments, leeches are still used today. In medieval times, they were placed on wounds to suck out bad blood and prevent infection. Turns out modern doctors actually use leeches in surgery to improve circulation, one of the few medieval treatments that that wasn't complete nonsense. Giving birth in medieval times was dangerous, so midwives relied on prayers, amulets, and herbal remedies to protect mothers and babies. Superstition and medicine often went hand in hand, because back then, any bit of luck was needed to survive. Welcome to a world long past but still brimming with life and stories. The medieval tavern. Imagine stepping into a space where the warm glow of candlelight reflects off wooden beams. The air is rich with the aroma of roasted meats and ale, and the room hums with laughter, conversation, and the occasional burst of a bard's tune. So grab a seat by the fire, raise a tankard, and join us as we step into the lively world of the medieval tavern. Taverns were far more than just places to eat and drink. They were essential stops for weary travellers, offering shelter, a warm meal, and a safe place to rest for the night. For merchants on long journeys, they provided opportunities to network, trade goods, and share news from distant lands. There were different types of taverns catering to various needs. The most common were alehouses, humble establishments frequented by peasants and labourers. Here, the focus was simple: a hearty drink and basic food to keep you going. Inns, on the other hand, offered more amenities, including lodging for travellers who needed a place to stay overnight. For the wealthy and noble class, high-end establishments provided finer accommodations, often with imported wines and exotic foods to suit their refined tastes. Taverns weren't just for individuals passing through. They often acted as informal community centres. Locals would gather to discuss village matters, celebrate special occasions, or even hold town meetings. In some cases, taverns doubled as courtrooms, where disputes were settled over a mug of ale. Tavern signs played a crucial role in medieval towns. Since many people couldn't read, these signs used symbols to represent the establishment. A red lion, a swan, or a cluster of grapes would signify a place to stop for a drink. They also helped travellers find their way in an unfamiliar town. Food and drink were the cornerstone of any good tavern experience, and the menu was as diverse as the patrons themselves. The staple dish of the time was pottage, a thick, hearty stew made from vegetables, grains, and sometimes meat if you could afford it. For those who preferred something simpler, trenchers were a common choice. These were slices of stale bread used as makeshift plates, absorbing the juices of whatever meal was served on them. Bread was a constant on the table, though it was often coarse and made from barley or rye. It was frequently paired with cheese or preserved meats, staples that could be stored and eaten throughout the year. Wealthier patrons, however, enjoyed more luxurious fare, such as roasted meats seasoned with exotic spices like cinnamon or cloves, a sign of wealth and status. And of course, no tavern visit was complete without a drink. Ale and beer were by far the most popular choices, brewed locally and often by women known as alewives. Ale was a safer alternative to water, as the brewing process involved boiling, which killed harmful bacteria. Mead, made from fermented honey, was another favourite, along with cider and wine, depending on the region and the tavern's clientele. In medieval times, drinking was more than just quenching thirst. It was a communal activity. Sharing a drink was a way to build trust and camaraderie, and toasts were often made to health, prosperity, or safe travels. It was also about entertainment. Taverns were places where people could unwind, have fun, and sometimes even try their luck. Dice games like Hazard were extremely popular. A simple roll of the dice could determine the winner of a bet, and with gambling being widespread, the stakes often ran high. Board games like Nine Men's Morris, a strategy game similar to modern checkers, were also common and brought patrons together in friendly competition. For those who preferred physical challenges, outdoor games like archery contests or throwing competitions offered entertainment and a chance to show off their skills. These events often drew crowds, creating a festive atmosphere. Performances were another highlight of tavern life. Minstrels and bards entertained patrons with songs, tales of heroism, and even the latest news from afar. Occasionally, travelling actors or jesters would stop by to perform comedic skits, adding humour to the evening's revelry. Gambling was a common pastime, whether on games, contests, or even on each other's skills. But to ensure fairness, some taverns implemented their own house rules, a set of guidelines that kept disputes to a minimum and the games running smoothly. Entertainment and games were the heartbeat of a medieval tavern, bringing people together and creating memories that would be shared for years to come. Justice in the Middle Ages was both brutal and unforgiving. Theft could lead to hanging, even for something as small as a loaf of bread. If you were accused of a crime, you might face trial by ordeal, where guilt or innocence was determined by divine intervention. For example, suspects might be forced to carry a red-hot iron in their hands and walk 3 meters. If the wound healed cleanly within 3 days, they were innocent. If not, you'd already be condemned. For lesser crimes, public humiliation was the order of the day. Stocks and pillories were commonplace, and villagers were encouraged to throw rotten food, or worse, at the accused. Prisons, when used, were horrifically unsanitary, often becoming a death sentence in themselves due to disease and neglect. The concept of mercy was virtually non-existent, and the punishments meted out served as gruesome deterrents for would-be offenders. If you weren't born into wealth, your life was one of endless toil and hardship. Most peasants were serfs, legally bound to the land and their lord. Your day began before sunrise and ended well after sunset, spent ploughing fields, harvesting crops, or tending livestock. In return, you kept just enough to survive, with much of your yield going to the Lord and the church, as taxes or tithes. Even in good years, food was basic: coarse bread, watery pottage, and occasional vegetables. Meat was rare for the lower classes, as hunting was reserved for nobles. If crops failed, as they often did due to poor weather or pests, famine was inevitable. Malnutrition weakened entire communities, leaving them vulnerable to diseases, while back-breaking labour took a heavy toll on bodies. For women, life in the Middle Ages was doubly harsh. They were often viewed as morally weak and subservient to men, a perception deeply rooted in religious teachings of the time. Daily life revolved around relentless domestic chores: spinning, weaving, brewing ale, and managing the household. Rural women also toiled in the fields alongside men, while noble women oversaw estates but had little personal freedom. Marriage was rarely about love. Women were seen as property, exchanged in marriages to secure alliances or improve social standing. Childbirth was one of the leading causes of death. Without pain relief or proper medical knowledge, complications often proved fatal for both mother and child. Midwives and herbal remedies were the only resources available, but they could do little against infections or difficult labours. The constant cycle of childbearing, illness and societal oppression left women with little reprieve from hardship. You would also notice that you wouldn't understand a single word. The common folk spoke Middle English, a dialect so foreign that it's nearly incomprehensible to modern ears. The elite communicated in French, and the clergy relied on Latin for prayers, documents, and sermons. These language barriers alone would make survival incredibly difficult. Even if you managed to communicate, literacy was a rare luxury. Only about 10% of men and 1% of women could read or write. Books were hand-copied, expensive treasures reserved for the wealthy or religious institutions. Most knowledge was passed down orally, creating an environment where misinformation and superstition flourished. Symbols and pictures helped bridge gaps, but they'd hardly prepare you for navigating this unfamiliar world. Childhood in the Middle Ages was a perilous journey fraught with danger. Nearly 1/3 of children didn't survive past the age of 5, falling victim to diseases like dysentery, measles, or whooping cough. The lack of medical knowledge, poor sanitation, and malnutrition only compounded the risks. Even in the womb, survival wasn't guaranteed. Poor diets during pregnancy led to complications, and women often consumed alcohol, unaware of its risks. For the lucky few who made it to adulthood, life was still harsh. The average life expectancy hovered around 30 to 40 years, though those who survived childhood illnesses and avoided war or famine could live longer. Still, the relentless hardships of the era ensured that few experienced a truly comfortable existence. Medieval Europe was rarely at peace. Wars between kingdoms and local lords were constant, and peasants were often conscripted to fight. Armed with little more than farm tools or crude weapons, they faced professional soldiers and brutal tactics. Casualties were high, and even if you survived the battlefield, the aftermath of war brought famine, disease, and economic ruin. The Crusades, the 100 Years' War, and countless smaller skirmishes claimed millions of lives. Villages were razed, livestock stolen, and fields burned, leaving entire communities destitute. The horrors of war weren't confined to the battlefield. Civilians often bore the brunt of the violence, living in perpetual fear of raids and invasions. Even the wealthy weren't immune to the dangers of medieval life. Fancy glazed pottery and leaded goblets were common at noble tables, but they often leached lead into food and drink. Chronic lead poisoning caused symptoms such as headaches, memory loss, and even death. Bread, a staple for rich and poor alike, sometimes carried ergot fungus, which caused ergotism. Symptoms included hallucinations, convulsions, and gangrene. Outbreaks of ergotism could devastate entire villages and may have inspired tales of witchcraft or mass hysteria. The combination of poor hygiene, contaminated food, and toxic materials created an environment where health was constantly jeopardized. The Middle Ages were a far cry from the romanticized tales we imagine. Disease, famine, violence, and ignorance defined daily life, and even the wealthy faced dangers unimaginable today. While we admire the art, architecture, and traditions of the period, one thing is clear: surviving even a single day in the Dark Ages would be a monumental challenge. The year is 1347. A mysterious and deadly disease has swept across Europe. Known as the Black Death, this pandemic comprised 3 forms of plague: bubonic, septicemic, and pneumonic. Together they ravaged the continent, reducing its population by as much as 50%. The question is, could you have survived? We'll explore the methods, some ingenious, others harsh, that might have kept you alive. Through these historical lessons, we uncover strategies for resilience that still hold relevance today. The pneumonic plague spread through airborne droplets, while the bubonic variety relied on fleas carried by rats. Urban centres, with their crowded streets, poor sanitation, and abundant rodent populations, became epicentres of the pandemic. To survive, the first rule was clear: stay away from the cities. Those who lived in rural areas or could escape to isolated villages significantly increased their chances of survival. Cities were hotbeds of infection, with dense populations exacerbating the rapid transmission of disease. For many, retreating to the countryside wasn't just an option, it was a necessity. Think of this as a medieval form of social distancing. Avoiding crowded markets, bustling taverns, and public festivals reduced exposure to infected individuals and flea-infested rodents. Isolation from these urban centres proved to be one of the most effective survival strategies. The practice of quarantine, a concept still used today, has its roots in the Black Death. In Venice, authorities required incoming ships to anchor offshore for 40 days, a practice known as 40 giorni, the origin of the word quarantine. This delay allowed time to identify and isolate potential carriers of the plague, reducing the risk of contagion. In Milan, officials took more extreme measures. Entire households displaying symptoms were sealed inside their homes. While this condemned many to die in isolation, it significantly lowered the city's mortality rate compared to other regions. These severe strategies demonstrate the lengths to which societies would go to curb the disease's spread. Contact with the deceased posed a significant risk. Corpses remained highly infectious, and the overwhelming number of deaths led to mass graves. In Florence, bodies were buried in layers with dirt between them, creating what one chronicler described as a human lasagna. Such practices underscore the desperation of the era. Specialised groups, known as becchini, were tasked with handling the dead. Their work was both essential and perilous, as many succumbed to the plague themselves. Some even turned to theft and violence, adding to the chaos. For the average person, avoiding contact with both the dead and those who managed them was a critical survival tactic. Fire served purposes beyond providing warmth. Pope Clement VI famously surrounded himself with a ring of flames, which likely kept infected individuals and disease-carrying fleas at bay. This unintentional method of disease prevention proved effective. Later, fire played a role in eradicating the plague from London. The Great Fire of 1666 destroyed much of the city's rat population, breaking the cycle of transmission. This historical example highlights how natural or deliberate actions can have unintended public health benefits. Plague doctors donned distinctive outfits, including bird-like masks filled with aromatic herbs. These masks were intended to filter miasma, or bad air, believed to carry the disease. Though scientifically inaccurate, the protective gear may have offered some defense against flea bites. The leather coats, gloves, and masks represented early attempts at personal protective equipment. While these measures were limited by the era's medical knowledge, they symbolized the ongoing effort to combat the plague. Good health was a valuable ally. Poor nutrition, unsanitary living conditions, and pre-existing illnesses heightened vulnerability to the plague. Acts like consuming fresh produce, maintaining personal hygiene, and staying active helped bolster natural defences. Though rooted more in practicality than science, these habits illustrate the connection between lifestyle and immunity. Even then, people understood the importance of physical well-being in the face of disease. Survival wasn't solely a matter of strategy. Genetic predispositions played a crucial role. Some individuals carried genetic traits that enhanced their resistance to Yersinia pestis, the bacterium responsible for the plague. Believing that foul air carried the disease, people burned incense and aromatic herbs to purify their surroundings. While ineffective against infection, these practices reflect early attempts to mitigate environmental risks and provide psychological comfort. The Black Death reshaped Europe and left a legacy of public health practices still relevant today. From quarantines to protective equipment, these historical strategies highlight humanity's ingenuity and resilience. Could you have survived, perhaps with a blend of preparation, adaptation, and luck? Most people in medieval times never travelled more than 10 miles from their birthplace. That's like spending your entire life in your hometown without ever leaving. Roads were dangerous, and most peasants were bound to the land, working for their lords from sunrise to sunset. Think your apartment needs a deep clean? Medieval homes had dirt floors, no glass windows, and were filled with the lovely aroma of smoke, sweat, and, well, livestock. Hygiene? That was a luxury few could afford. Toilets, forget about them. Most people simply had a hole in the ground or used chamber pots, which were dumped, sometimes out the window, onto the streets. Yep, medieval streets were not a place you'd want to take a casual stroll. Forget fancy silverware. Forks weren't commonly used in medieval Europe. People ate with their hands, knives, and sometimes spoons. If you dined with royalty, you might get a napkin. Otherwise, it was all about licking your fingers clean. Believe it or not, women were the primary brewers of beer. Since water was often unsafe to drink, beer was the go-to beverage for all ages. Brewing beer was a household task, just like cooking or baking bread. The medieval work week? 6 days a week, sunrise to sunset. Peasants worked long hours farming, tending livestock, and doing whatever their lord required. Sundays were a day of rest, and a much-needed break. Marriage in the Middle Ages happened early, sometimes as young as 12 for girls. Marriages were often arranged for economic or political reasons, not love. Romance novels had nothing on medieval reality. Think you can wear whatever you want, not in medieval times. Sumptuary laws dictated what colours and fabrics you could wear based on your social class. Peasants, earth tones, nobles, rich, vibrant hues. Medieval fairs were the highlight of the year. Think of them as a mix of a sports event, a music festival, and a wild party. Jousting, drinking, bear baiting, and live entertainment kept the crowds entertained. While peasants lived on bread and porridge, Nobles feasted on extravagant dishes: swan, peacock, and even whale. Presentation was everything. Sometimes chefs would reassemble cooked birds with their feathers just for show,